All right, and we are live. So, welcome everyone to this web class on depending on where you are in the world, but here in New Zealand, it's the 26th of August 2017, 8:30 a.m. in the morning. And it looks like we have the chat function working all good. So just before, it's late evening in Germany, just before we do get officially underway, we've got Susan waiting by. Can you just let me know in that chat function there that you can see and hear me okay and everything is working, and we will get underway ASAP. While you're doing that, I'm sure our guest for a lot of you needs no introduction, but let me just give you a brief intro to Dr. Susan Friedman. She's a psychology professor at Utah State University, and she's pioneered the application of applied behavior analysis to captive and companion animals. ABA, with its roots in human learning, offers a scientifically sound teaching technology and ethical standard that can improve the lives of all learners. Students from 22 different countries have participated in Susan's online courses, Living and Learning with Animals for Professionals and Living and Learning with Parrots for Caregivers. She has written chapters on learning and behavior for 3 veterinary texts and is a frequent contributor to popular magazines. Her articles appear around the world in 11 languages. Susan has presented seminars internationally for a wide variety of professional organisations, such as the Association of Avian Veterinarians, the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, Moorpark College Exotic Animal Training and Management Program, and NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. She's been nominated for the Media Award given by the International Association of Behavior Analysis for her efforts to disseminate to pet owners, veterinarians, animal trainers, and zookeepers the essential tools they need to empower and enrich the lives of animals in their care. And we are very grateful to have Susan joining us this afternoon in Utah, this morning here in New Zealand. So I'm going to ask Susan now to turn on her camera and her microphone. And thank you for all of the confirmations from all around the world that everything is working okay. Good morning / afternoon, Susan.
Thank you. Hi, Ryan. Hi, everybody. It's good to see all of your names. Some of which I know.
Yeah, potentially we have some LLA participants here. I'm not 100% sure. And I counted up before we started. I think we are being represented in somewhere between 10 to 15 countries today in this web class.
I love to hear that. And one revision I need to make to that bio is that LLA students have come from 31 countries now. And on the phone on Tuesday night for that class, we had 15 different countries just for that class alone. So you and I are keeping cadence together on influencing around the world, which is very exciting.
We had someone join from Israel, which I'm really excited about, from Finland this morning as well. And just, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Second that, before we do kick into gear, just want to express Susan gratitude from myself, from Phoebe Dog on my lap, and from everyone who's attending the live web class today, and also anyone who's watching the replay. Just massive appreciation for taking time out of your day to come and hang out with us today. Thank you very much. So the format of this web class is something we haven't done before. It's going to be a live Q&A. So for those who come frequently to the web classes, we're just going to skip the normal video updates we do at the start. We're just going to utilize our opportunity to engage with Susan as much as we can. You have sent me, a lot of questions previous to the start of this web class. So you've figured out how to use a chat function. For those people who are new, please use that throughout the web class. I'm going to be moderating that. Susan's going to be checking that out. And ask your questions in there, and we will be asking questions from the ones that you've provided previous to the web class as well. So let's get starting. I thought we'd start, Susan, if it's okay, with just some basic questions about you and getting started in your career. So Kim Archer, who is an animal trainer from Brooklyn Zoo right here in New Zealand, Kim wanted to know when you first realized that you wanted to make a career out of animal training and behavior. And do you have any advice for anyone that's wanting to go down that route?
Yeah, like most of you, I was an animal nut even as a child. In fact, when my parents would send me to camp, the only place I was ever successful was in the nature hut. I got stood in the corner for all the other activities. So I think, right, they just gave up and let me stay in the nature hut all day long, which was divine. And then my parents, who were always very kind and supportive, would allow me to bring an animal home from camp every summer. So that accounted for Daphne the rabbit and a snake and a variety of other nature hut experiences. So I always loved animals, but I think I also always loved behavior. It was really clear to me that psychology and behaving organisms were fascinating and a really deep well of interesting things to explore. So I was also that kid who people would come to with their boyfriend problems and that kind of thing. I was always sort of angling in on what was interesting about behavior. After I got a college degree in psychology, which essentially leads nowhere in terms of the job market, I did eventually get a job at a residential treatment center for adolescent boys who were variably labeled emotionally disturbed, behavior disorder, and just really the most extreme and destructive behaviors on the planet, I would say comfortably. And that was where I also got such great fortune to meet Skinner, who was on the board of directors, and the director himself, Wells Hively, was a Skinner student, and Ogden Lindsley was on the board. And these are some of the great names in behavior analysis. So as a young 20-year-old, I was, just by really good fortune, able to meet people who were studying behavior, were influencing behavior well. And that's what I grew up in that culture of behavior analysis. And I worked with children for several years and then went back to school to get my doctorate in special education, which is where the behavior analysts were at the time. I've often observed that animal trainers using the technology of behavior science and special educators using the technology of behavior science grew up like siblings separated at birth. And it's only now in the last 15 or 20 years that we're coming together to make this whole a much greater than the parts. So when I went to get my doctorate at Utah in special ed, I worked again with children and then graduate students. For 20 years, I was a professor. And then I just decided it was time to do something new, but it had to be in behavior. And it was kind of, again, just really good fortune, for which I am always grateful, of being a person who had a particular knowledge set and a field, the animal training and caring field, that wanted to know more about the science of behavior. So what I did was kind of boldly, with my mentor pushing me forward, start to stride out connecting the dots between working with children who have special learning needs to working with animals, non-human animals, but that are in human care. And so that's how I started, was just really seeing a need and taking my existing expertise and education and working hard to fit those two interests together. And then the last part of the story, if it's not I think it may be a boring story, but it's as it happened, was that I started to meet very influential people in the animal training world. So early on, Bobby Brinker, who works with companion parrots, and then that led me to Steve Martin, who led me to zoos and other great trainers that I've worked with over the many years. So as I started working with these people, we all realized what a great combination of information, how empowering this would be for people caring for animals and for the animals themselves. So that explains my background and how I hopped from kids in need of highly skilled teachers to animals, non-human learners in need of highly skilled teachers. It's all so very, very similar. And as terms of advice, it's hard to give a clear path because, as you can see, my path kind of zigzagged across learner species. And it was also dotted with just fabulous good luck. Right now, we're a little bit ahead of the curve. People working with animals who are interested in connecting the dots between animal training and behavior analysis don't have a clear university program to go to walk that path in a straight line. So it's going to take boldness on your part and creativeness to find universities that allow you to cobble that together, and at the same time building your skills working with companion and exotic animals. I do have a spreadsheet that Eduardo Fernando put together for us, another behavior analyst working with non-human animal learners. And if anybody's interested in that spreadsheet, Ryan, I'm happy to send it to you. It's a spreadsheet of universities that work with behavior and behavior science. And and then the rest just continue networking with our community and keeping working, keeping moving as best we can.
Very cool. And I know Kim personally, so you said you have to be bold, Kim. I know you're there watching. I know that boldness is one of your traits. So looking forward to following your progress over the coming years, Kim. Just before we move on, one thing I'm really curious about, you mentioned that you got to drive Skinner home a couple of times. You mentioned that when we were talking yesterday. I'm curious, for someone who had the honour, the privilege, the pleasure to get to spend some time with Skinner, what was he like?
He was truly amazing, and nothing like I call it the Reader's Digest or the Pop magazine version of him. He was quiet and very deep, very reflective. You could see and hear his wheels turning with every step. I have some beautiful photographs of him with all of these really terribly behaved inner city boys clamoring around him, and him just being so loving and patient to give each one a moment of his time. On the ride home, I think back on that now. It was about an hour-and-a-half trip. And I remember us talking about everything except behavior science. And I think I was just so young in my career that truthfully, I didn't understand who I was driving. I mean, I knew that he was, the father of learning science. I knew he was important and that it was a privilege, but I didn't have the wellspring of questions that I have now about how behavior works. So I have a wonderful mentor, a student of Skinner's, Carl Cheney, who has also worked a lot with human and non-human learners in his long career. He's about 85 now. And he is instead of Skinner, and we have lunch and dinner at least once a week. And I pelt him with questions, and I'm so thankful that he gives me direction, my learning, going, moving. Yeah.
And so the importance of connections is a big takeaway, and I draw similarities to when we met in 2010, and I was sitting there having dinner with you and everyone else that was at that table. I didn't know who I was having dinner with.
Me, another hungry person.
Looking back, I potentially might have asked different questions at the time if I had the foresight of the future.
Well, the good news, Ryan, though, is that you can always email me. You have open access to me. So I can't go back in time for Skinner, but I can at least offer that access to you. And that's why I cling to Carl Cheney so much these days.
All right. Well, consider yourself clung to then, Susan.
Good.
Louisa, who's also so this was kind of a joint question at the same organisation as Kim, she just wanted to inquire a little bit more about some of your experience and just wanted to know what is one of the most challenging animals or behavioural challenges you've ever worked with. And she also wanted to know if there's a species you haven't worked with that you would really like to.
Yeah, there are. I have worked with many species, or through trainers that I'm coaching or problem solving with. I have worked with species. I can't think offhand of any that I wish to that I have. I've worked with trainers of gorillas and orangutans, the primates, which have been fascinating, and some of the other big, sort of flagship species like elephants. But I've also enjoyed working with Komodo dragons, turtles. I stopped to take a photograph of an amazing slug the other day at Yorkshire Wildlife Park in the UK. So I'm always looking and stopping and appreciating and taking every opportunity. But in terms of the most challenging, I guess my answer is probably not unique. It's those behaviors for which we can't spy a clear reinforcer, a maintaining reinforcer for. It's those behaviors that we're not sure what signals it from the antecedent part of our influence and what the function is for the animal. That is, what does the animal get back from the environment by persisting in those behaviors? So those would be the behaviors that fall under the category of self-injurious behaviors. Sometimes they're better called stereotypic or repetitive behaviors. And so I think those still have all of us really perplexed about what accounts for those behaviors and how to help them. One big insight that I've had in the last couple of years working with behaviors with like repetitive pacing in bears or self-injurious behaviors in elephants is that there's a difference between a resource problem and a behavior problem. Ryan, is that your static that I'm hearing, or is there something I should do?
Is it gone now? Is it still there?
Yeah, it's gone now.
Yep. So, sorry. Might have been because I was doing something with my mouse, but I'll stop now. So maybe that was it. Let's see if that fixes it.
Okay, let's watch consequences select for Ryan's behavior. And it might be happening when I'm talking.
Yeah. Hang out so you can never.
I'll just ignore as long as you tell me to keep going. Okay. So I wanted to share that with you because it's one of my new insights. And so there are situations where, even though it may be difficult, we can change a problem behavior like stereotypic pacing or self-injurious behavior. And we've even demonstrated for months that we can suppress that problem behavior and replace it with other behaviors, more helpful and successful behaviors. But at the end of the day, those solutions take a lot from the resources. They need more keepers. They need more infrastructure, more help from the maintenance and grounds crew. We need more browse. We need more soldering to hang more complex puzzle feeders. And at the end of the day, if we can't put the resources that we need to the solution, then it's no longer a behavior problem. It's now a resource problem. And so I wonder for those of you working at facilities if that's a useful distinction to make. When somebody says to me, the program that we've designed together and worked for 7 months is no longer working, I have started to ask, are you able to continue running that program with the appropriate intensivity that we designed in the program? And so far, always the answer is no. I don't have the resources to have more keepers or more puzzle feeders hung in the enclosure. And so that's when I raise that flag, then it's a resource problem, not a behavior problem, because we can change the behavior if we have the resources we need. And I think that means once we identify it as a resource problem, then we have to solve the resource problem, not the behavior problem.
Yeah, and we talked about this in our podcast episode together, didn't we? You gave the example of an elephant who was demonstrating self-injurious behaviours. So if you guys want to build upon what Susan just said, you can jump to the podcast episode after the webcast and go over that again. And to be honest with you, that snippet of the podcast has stuck with me, and I put a lot of thought into that. So
yeah, I think it's relevant whether we're working with domestic pet animals, when we work with clients and they say, oh, but I can't do that, and oh, but I can't do this, and oh, but I can't do that. My answer to them now would be, then this is no longer a behavior problem with your dog. it's a resource problem that you can't allocate what it takes to help your dog. So how can we solve the resource problem?
Yeah. Very, very valid and very useful, and a very different question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hey, we're going to move on now to talking about emotions, Susan. I know we briefly mentioned that we were going to do that yesterday. So just going to start with a question from Rose. She wants to know, Rose is from Denmark, who is going to be watching a replay because it's pretty late in Denmark and she was a bit tired. But Rose wanted to know where our thinking about emotions fit into how we manage behavior from an ABA perspective and also from other scientific disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, you expressed that question really well. There are many different sciences, all of which are involved in investigating behavior. So it really does matter what perspective you're coming from, whether that perspective is from ABA or from brain science or from physiology. So it is important to cast our discussion with the level of analysis or the model, the science that we're coming from. So it's no surprise that I'd be coming from the behavior analysis model, and that model, the hallmark or the focus of that model is explaining behavior through behavior-environment relations. That's not to say that there aren't other ways to explain behavior, like a neuroscience approach or a methodological approach, natural selection and natural history. But when we talk about a learning perspective, then we're talking about how the environment moves behavior, and then behavior influences the environment in this very elegant feedback loop of we get a signal, the antecedent, we behave, that is, we perform, and then the outcome of behavior is the feedback from the environment that tells us whether to repeat the behavior or to revise what we do in the future. When we talk about emotion from a behavior analysis perspective, it's a little bit problematic because emotion, those things we experience inside our body that we call emotion, are a private event to each individual, to the individual lion, or the individual boy, or the individual cat. The thing we label emotion exists inside, so it's a covert behavior. Only the individual experiencing it can describe it. And then we're never sure if the description that they use is describing the same perception that we perceive when we feel unhappy or angry or afraid. So we have this verbal community, which is itself a learned behavior that, for example, if I'm hungry, I feel certain physiology and I report verbally that's hunger. But when you say you're hungry, I don't know that you're feeling the same thing I'm feeling. I just know we both call something hunger, and we to be able to reduce or balance, get homeostasis and balance that experience. So that's true with the discussion of emotion. When you say you feel angry, I might be able to see your eyes get squinty and your jaw get tight and your voice raise and your feet stomp and your hands close in fists. But covert behavior, your private event, I'm not sure whether or not you're experiencing the same things that I am. So from a behavior analysis, from a science perspective, it's a little problematic to talk about emotions because they're hard to verify. Ryan, do you think it's my AirPods?
We can experiment and see if it makes a difference.
Okay, let me put them away and use, because we didn't have this yesterday and we stayed online together for a couple of hours.
Yeah. Have you got an alternative microphone? When Susan's mic is open, we're getting some static.
Well, we think it's that it's my mic. Let's see what we get. I'm putting away these AirPods now, and I'm on my computer speakers, and that doesn't seem to be changing it.
No, it's actually created the static for me when it wasn't there before.
Is it when I'm talking?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not the AirPods. Let me try. I can come back in again.
Yeah, we can give that a go. Let's try that.
Because we didn't have it yesterday. So I'm thinking maybe it's more about our connectivity.
Yeah, just give that a go and we'll see where we are.
Okay. Everybody go get a cup of coffee or a beer and I'll be right back.
Go to the bathroom if you need to. Cool. So hopefully everyone's enjoying themselves so far. And just curious on that feedback, is that actually preventing you from being able to hear what Susan's saying? Or is it still something you can actually listen to? Because the options are to keep trying things or to persist if you can still actually make out what Susan's saying. So you can't, Ellie, you're saying you can't actually make out what Susan's saying, which is obviously a challenge that we will work through. Additionally, feel free to utilize that chat function. Kelly says it doesn't affect her ability to hear, so we'll get Susan back. Sometimes difficult to understand because of it. But if there's no solution, keep on listening. But I can hear Susan and understand it. Annoying but bearable. We can still hear with the static. Okay, cool. Let's see what happens once Susan comes back with us. Hello.
Hi there.
How's that for everyone? Is that any different? It's quite clear.
I can still hear that static.
So people are communicating that they can still make out what you're saying, and they would label it as annoying. However, they say that it's okay with regards to them being able to hear what you're saying and hear your thoughts. So potentially we have to continue with this undesirable elements of what we're doing with regards to streaming from different sides of the world.
Sure. We are resilient. And I do think that the static is a little less now.
Seems to be for me, yeah. Some people have no static, so it's there's so many cogs turning and so many different internet connections and browsers.
There are, and there's a lot more strain on this connection with our class instead of just you and I. There is one other thing I can try if you'd like me to. I can get a headset that plugs into the computer. Shall I give that a whirl?
Yeah, people are saying it's a lot better as well at the moment. So let's give that a whirl. Okay. If it's not going to take too long.
Let me go get the headset.
Okay, great.
But it means that you're going to have to sing or dance until I get back.
All right, guys. So some song requests would be good, and I'll warm my vocal cords up, and we'll get going on some New Zealand songs maybe. I'm not sure. I don't sing in many other languages, so you'll just have to put up with the Kiwi twang. Now, I was saying just before Susan popped back on, please feel free to jump in the chat there and add any comments and / or questions and anything you want to say in the chat function as we're going. And let me catch your tone. I'm not actually going to do it. I am not someone who gets embarrassed that easily, but I am quite embarrassed of my inability to sing on tune. Maybe one day in the future, and I'm sure you guys would all reinforce my behavior if I was to engage in that. Just give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what we're going to talk about. So we are going to talk about emotions quite a bit. Sylvia is wanting to know a little bit about Panksepp's research. Rose just wanted to know how it fit into the ABA perspective. Sarah Cox wanted to know about how we the idea of emotions as behaviors. So I don't know if you guys have seen it. We shared it in a WhatsApp group recently, but you can see it on Facebook, a video of Susan and Kathy Sato, if I got that right, talking at Clicker Expo this year on this subject. So you might have already seen that, but we're going to potentially build on that. And we're going to talk about keep going signal, end of session signal, jackpots, blazing clickers, and about how to disseminate this information to the best of your ability to other people. And we all know, because we're all here, that we advocate positive reinforcement animal training, things that we can learn from Susan, good environmental arrangement, force-free, ethical methods of behavior change. And a couple of people were asking how we can best disseminate information about this because I know a lot of you guys are influential in your own communities. Some of you have Facebook pages, some of you have your own dog training facilities. So we're going to talk about how to disseminate information specifically to people who might not want to, or might not be as open, or as open to the ethical perspective, let's say. How's that, Susan?
Okay, let's give this a try. How is this? I'm not hearing.
I can hear you great. It sounds really clear to me, actually. So
okay.
I'm going to do my Buddhist chants internally. That is also replicated, very stylish. So you've got some fashion.
Thank you. Blue.
not as stylish as my R2D2.
The two of us now. Oh, well, this is the radio show host dream.
I didn't do any singing while you were gone. I was tempted to, or people were trying to tempt me to, I should say.
Okay, well, I can get back to talking about emotions.
Please.
So it's problematic for that reason, because it's your private event. And when you describe it verbally, the way you describe it is a function of how you've learned to use your language in that way. So it's hard to verify. Easier to verify it from, for example, a physiological perspective. We can measure saliva, dry mouth, heart rate, blood pressure. But when it comes to describing emotions from a behavioral perspective, there are some challenges. When I spoke with Kathy about emotions at the Clicker Expo you were talking to, the reading I had done had brought me to the point where, and discussions with my mentor, Dr. Cheney, had brought me to the point where I found it useful to think about emotions as behavior that are the result of selection by consequences, just like any other behavior. So when I behave in angry ways, it is correlated with certain physiology, rapid heart rate, high blood pressure, churning stomach, and the overt emotional behavior you see of me shouting or clenching my fists or having a tight jaw are selected by consequences. I behave angry more when that anger has usefulness. Another way to look at it is with the example that was given by Gold Diamond, who is one of the original researchers in behavior analysis and leaders who discussed emotions first. He said the classic interpretation of why a man runs up the tree might be because he's afraid. He runs because he feels fear when a bear is chasing him. Another interpretation might be that he runs and that elicits the internal fear behaviors. And those would be two very common explanations. He runs because he feels afraid, or he feels afraid because he runs. But what Gold Diamond pointed out, and then Joe Lang, so I'm giving you the name so you can Google and pursue this if you want, Joe Lang talks about, is that from a behavior analysis perspective, neither of those are useful descriptions. From our point of view, he runs and he feels fear because a bear is chasing him. So I think that really illustrates for us from our level of analysis what we're talking about, that it's the input from the environment that influences behavior, all behavior, including emotional behavior, including the behavior overt that we see and a behavior that's covert, that's private to each individual. The bear is the explanation that is most useful for us from a behavior analysis point of view, because it's going to be either teaching the bear to go where there are not people, which I worked on a project at the university with a master's student, changing bears' behavior away from human trash bins. Or we may teach the man, depending on the kind of bear, to be really big and tall and scare the bear away, make a lot of noise. Or if it's a different species of bear, we might teach him to lay down and play dead. So from our point of view, the most important variable is what in the environment is influencing the behavior, both emotional behavior and the running behavior. So is that clear to that point? And then I can add one more layer.
So what's important to us is you say how the environment's influencing both behavior and the emotional layer. So do we have to use for example, the anger example that you gave, the clenched fist or the clenched jaw, whatever it was? We're just going to, from the ABA perspective, use these measurable behaviors that we can see in the animal and social person, and we're going to then add our interpretation and somehow clearly articulate that.
I think we have to use the overt behaviors and infer if we need to know what's going on inside the private area, the private behaving area of the animal. We can infer it, but all we can do is work with what we can see. So for that part of your question, I think that that's correct. We're looking at overt behavior, and then we're giving it a name that assumes what the animal is experiencing internally. I think the mistake that's made, and maybe can be my contribution to your working with emotional behavior, is that hang on a second, I lost my thought, is when we see the overt behavior and we infer what's going on inside the animal, the mistake we make is to use what we infer as the causal explanation for the overt behavior we see. So in other words, we say the animal is angry because we see that its hackles are up, its ears are pinned, and its tail is tucked tightly. Its ears are pinned, its hackles are up, and its tail is tucked because it's angry. And the distinction I'm making, and that has been written about in behavior analysis, is that the cause of the ear pinning, the hackles up, and the tail tuck is not the anger inside the animal. It's what is in the environment that is provoking that experience, those behaviors, both in overt behavior, the ears, the hackles, and the tail, and the private behavior of the dog, which may also be, salivating, tense muscles, rapid heartbeat, cortisol release, endorphin, dopamine, those. So the important part of what I want to hand off to you is what we do once we acknowledge that we're going to stick with overt behavior and make inferences about the private experience of the animal, the private emotional experience. The important thing is to recognize that both the emotional experience, the feelings of anger, and the overt experience of hackles up and ears pinned are caused by something in the environment. And that's what we're accountable for. So we might say, why is the animal afraid and has its hackles up and its ears pinned? Because another dog is closer than 10 meters. The cause of both the emotion of fear and the overt behaviors of fear are caused by the approaching dog. That's our level of analysis. We are the architects or the designers of the environment to change behavior. We're not changing the inside of the animal through medicine or nutrition or the other levels of analysis that are also very important. When we all come to the table to have a complete accounting of behavior, what we put onto the table is how the environment is influencing the behavior we see and the inferences of the behavior inside the animal we don't see.
So we wouldn't say he's growling, hackles up because he feels afraid. We would say he feels afraid and his hackles are up because another dog is within 10 meters. And by changing the dog, the distance, we will change both the overt behavior and the covert behavior.
So
is that clear?
Yeah, and it reminds me of one of the things you taught me and summed up in a couple of words that I really like, is that behavior doesn't occur in a vacuum.
Right.
And can you speak to this idea?
Yeah. Behavior doesn't just pop out of an animal from the inside out. It is always related, responsive to the environment, the conditions in which the animal is behaving. There is no behavior without environmental input. And it's very new information from the people who study genes and the people who study brains that consequences, the environment, are also influencing which genes are activated, which genes are inactive, and how our neurons and synapses and brain chemicals work. So we're in a really exciting place because we are studying the relation between behavior and the environment. And it turns out that the influence of the environment is also relevant to gene expression and neurofunction. So the environment is influencing everything in this behaving system. Everything. If you want to change brains and genes, you would also change the conditions in which the animal is behaving. If you want to change overt behavior, you would also change the conditions in which the animal is behaving. Behavior doesn't occur in a vacuum, and it's not popping out of animals willy-nilly. It is always interacting with the environment.
And we've got some more questions surrounding this from the list I made before the web class. One thing that was new to me that you described to me yesterday when we were talking was a way of thinking about how we can incorporate different models when we're coming at something from an ABA perspective. And you use this idea of a bullseye or a target for a bow and arrow. And another one that really stuck with me from when I first did LLA was a picture you shared of ABA perspective being part of a jigsaw puzzle.
That's right. I think it's a great metaphor, and it's stood the test of time. Other things that I've learned that have changed in some ways the way I think about things, like emotions, this jigsaw puzzle metaphor has really lasted for me. I think people misunderstand that when we are diving deep into one level of analysis, for example, behavior analysis, that we are discounting the importance or even the existence of other sciences. And that's not the case at all. Modern consumer of behavior science would never have the argument of nature versus nurture. We understand now that nurture is our biology, that is to learn based on experience. To learn from nurture, to learn from experience is our nature. It's our biology. And so it all can easily fall under sort of the life sciences. Behavior is the study of learning behavior is a life science more than a psychology, depending on how you understand the word psychology. So I think of the contemporary thinking about it is that all of these different sciences are a jigsaw puzzle, and we have the piece that is focused on the learning behavior, the learning aspects of an organism's life. And then an ethologist will bring the puzzle piece of natural history, how Darwinian selection has adapted the species in general to fit the niche that they are living in. And the neuroscientists, who I teasingly call the sexy sister, because everybody loves to hear about how the brain works. It's a wonderful mystery that's starting to be revealed. The neuroscience is another piece of the puzzle. And the biology, biophysics, the medical health, nutrition, all of these are pieces of the puzzle. And no account of behavior is complete without bringing all the pieces together. So I think that's very true. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I don't get to specialize in just one piece of the puzzle. So my specialty, my love, and my interest is how the environment changes behavior. That is learning, how experience changes behavior. I find learning to be the most remarkable part of our biology, of all the different remarkable parts. And so we do get to specialize. We just need to keep our science siblings close, and we need to know enough about what they do to recognize when we need them. So I need to know when an animal looks like it's hungry, or an animal looks like it's malnourished, or that it's experiencing pain from arthritis, or those kinds of things. So we keep our science siblings close. Yeah. And they should keep us close.
And so I don't think you did then, sorry if I missed it, add the dartboard or bow and arrow bullseye concept as well?
So now that we have all these many pieces of this complex puzzle laid out, I switch metaphors to the target to justify what is my bullseye. Given my career, the bullseye of my work is learning. That is behavior change due to certain kinds of experience, contact with the environment, reinforcers, selecting behavior, punishers, and extinction deselecting behavior. That's my bullseye. And then on the outer rings of the target, of the archer's target, we can put any other science of interest to us. So when I think of a veterinarian in general, a veterinarian may have as their bullseye the medical health, the biophysical health of the animal, and they may have behavior as one of their rings on the target. For those of us who are training and teaching, those of us who are fascinated and dedicated to learning behavior, the bullseye is behavior analysis, because that's the science that expressly studies the relation between behavior and environmental influence, behavior and conditions. So our mantra in that bullseye is to change behavior, change conditions. That's how we work. That doesn't mean that we might not need to change behavior with medicine if that's the right level of analysis. But for us, those interests, I think, are rings on the target. The bullseye is, without question, the science of learning, of behavior change, and its technology, training and teaching.
I like that. That's our mantra. And if you know me, if you've been with ATA for a while, I'm always asking you about ABCs and what we can see in here and all of this stuff. So you could interpret that as my bullseye. Additionally, having been very influenced by Susan, is that AVA one in the middle of that archery board, and just think that. People were saying it in the chat there, Susan. You've got such a great way of explaining this. I really like the kind of picture it puts in your mind when you use words like our science siblings. It's a really nice way of articulating these ideas. So we've got, for example, different species, and they got their different behaviors that are part of their evolutionary history. And one group that's been studied a lot is dogs. So we've got Jose in there saying that we can go to the internet and we can find pictures of body language and associated emotional states with those pictures. How do we incorporate that? If we're approaching a behavioral intervention or a behavioral challenge with an ABA bullseye, and we've got this information about if a dog's licking its nose or yawning and this, that, and the other, it's stressed, for example. What's your input on how to meld that together?
Yeah, I'm afraid it may be a little bit unexpected. When I hear about those, for me, those descriptions are generalities. They describe the population at large. We call those the parameters of a species. Dogs in general behave these ways given certain conditions. Okay, so a dog that is uncertain may start lip licking. And that'll be true for most dogs. So if you think of the normal bell curve, those descriptions fall in the mean and the fat part of that curve. But it will also be true that there will be outliers on that curve that sit in the tails of that bell shape. And they may or may not behave in those species typical ways. So while I think it's very important to become very educated about this natural history or evolutionary or generalization level, our work is really highlighted by our ability to work with the individual in front of us. And that's why I came up with that phrase, behavior change is really a study of one. That although I may have a dog in front of me of a particular breed, and I can read up on their signals that describe that breed in general, I may be working with an individual animal who is more like a giraffe than it is a Rottweiler. I mean to say that there is so much variability around these general descriptions that we have to stay very close to where we work, which is with individuals, one individual at a time. So we meld the two together as the natural history being the likely background in the frame, but the individual in front of us is the foreground. And I have to see what lip licking means for this individual animal. And based on its learning history, it may or may not use that signal the way other dogs do in general from that breed. And that skill of being able to sort of move to the background, those generalities, and zero in with super keen observation skills, this particular individual, this particular learner, and the environment that is moving that learner's behavior as a study of one is really, I think, one of our most important skills. So I know I mentioned to you yesterday, it always sort of flips me into the Star Trek zone. I remember one of my very favorite episodes was when Data, the android, goes to his captain, Jean-Luc, and says, Captain, I'm having these terrible nightmares, and I have no culture to help me interpret them. And Jean-Luc says to him, Data, you are a culture of one, no more or less important than a culture of 1 million. And I always think about that. I can read up and interview experts and consume research on what a black rhino does in general and how in general they are different from white rhinos. But when I stand in front of an individual rhino, that rhino is a study of one, a culture of one, no more or less important than 1 million rhinos. And I think that becomes really one of our sharpest skills, is the ability to see how this individual uses their behavior and what from the environment is reinforcing it, selecting or deselecting.
And just before we move on, because I realize the time and we've spent quite a bit of time on this, I think it's really important though, and I'm aware that I found it very important as an individual. So hopefully that is additionally beneficial to people that are attending this web class at the moment. But one thing that you added in our conversation yesterday that helped build upon this for me is that if we're looking at these diagrams and we have a dog licking its nose or yawning or shaking, and it means this label, this emotion, it can potentially jeopardize, and tell me if you or what you think about my thought process, it can potentially jeopardize our ability to assist, because the input you gave me yesterday that I hadn't thought about before is becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we go in acting in ways that might say this animal's stressed. We're behaving in ways that might or may not be true for the individual.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's great that was important to you. It's important to me too. There's such a huge body of literature on this thing called the Pygmalion effect, or the self-fulfilling prophecy or expectation effect, that when you look at an animal's behavior and you immediately draw the conclusion, not the hypothesis, which is always soft and tentative, pending data, but you draw the conclusion that this animal is stressed, you may behave in ways that actually telescope the need to be stressed to that animal. And we've all talked about this in ways before, but now you're helping us put it together in a bigger, more important whole, which is we talk about people who are comfortable and confident around an animal and how animals then reflect that confidence and that calmness. We ask children to take deep breaths before stepping into rooms with birds, for example, because that will affect how the birds are behaving. So we are aware that how we behave is going to influence others, but the self-fulfilling prophecy is about how our thinking behavior telescopes out to other individuals and changes how they behave. So when we believe an animal is behaving aggressively, we may, in fact, produce more aggressive behavior, more lunging and biting. I think that, so you helped me put together two dots about hypotheses. I think that these general descriptions, these ethological or natural history descriptions, are good for us to be educated in, and then we should use them as hypotheses for how the environment and the animal's behavior are interacting, and keep that as soft, educated guess, and then test the environment behavior relations to see whether or not those hypotheses are confirmed.
I think that's beautiful. Before we move on, one of our audience members, I'm just going to really summarize what she said, but she was just curious to hear, to maybe build upon, because you've mentioned it to a certain degree already in your answer, the research done by Panksepp with regards to the systems in the brain.
Two emotions, yeah. It's an interesting thing because I, from my reading and my listening to webinars and speeches by Panksepp, have never gotten the impression that he thought his work was going to be directly relevant to training decisions. I think what he did was he found these circuits in the brain that when he manipulated them, changed the emotional, what we would call or describe the emotional behavior of the animal. And he gave those names. But there was a huge leap in inference and assumption to take that beginning research and use it as an explanation for our training decisions. For example, I now hear people say, I'm going to use this method of dog training because it puts my dog in seeking mode. Or when I hear people generalize from the neuroscience research that they see the dopamine expressed at the click, so they no longer have to back that up with a well-established backup reinforcer like food. These are terrible overinterpretations and misinterpretations of a very beginning science in our new neuroscience of healthy functioning brains that we're able to study now with new technology. I think that it is unlikely that information is useful to those of us who are using, who are teaching and training. I think we still need to ask, how is the environment moving behavior? Understanding that wherever behavior goes, the animal's biology follows, both its genes and its brain goes. But that's not our level of analysis. And I wanted to add one other thing that kind of relates to Panksepp is the newer information that I'm processing about emotions that might be useful to us is emotions as descriptors of the contingency the animal is experiencing. In other words, the conditions that the animal is experiencing. And since we specialize in changing behavior by changing conditions, seeing emotions as descriptors of these conditions is probably the most useful understanding of emotions we can have for the work we do. So, for example, if I'm feeling fear, that may be describing a punishment contingency, that there's aversive stimulation in the environment, and that to change the fear, what I need to do is change that punishment contingency. And when I feel happy, that is describing a positive reinforcement contingency. And so that's a contingency I want to experience again. If I feel depressed, I might be describing contingencies of too little reinforcement, too low of a rate of reinforcement for my behavioral output. So I need to change my behavior to increase that rate of reinforcement. Do you see where I'm going? Mm-hmm. So emotions as contingency descriptors is what I've been learning about from primarily Joe Lang, who has a great webinar and some nice articles on it. So again, explanations for behavior have to be useful to us. And what the animal's brain is doing is not particularly useful since we don't change brains directly. We assume brains are changing when we change behavior. We change behavior by changing contingencies, changing the environment in which the animal's behaving. And we can assume the brain and the genes are following along.
So is this, coming back full circle now to the start of the question where we mentioned this conversation which became quite popular on social media between you and Kathy Sato at Clicker Expo recently. And that started as a question about viewing emotions as behaviors.
Right.
Does that build on what you just said? Is that what you just said, or is it different?
One explanation of emotions is that they are behaviors that follow the laws of learning behavior, that follow the laws of reinforcement, of punishment, of extinction. And I think that's useful. Another way to look at behavior that is not different but maybe more refined is to say that what's important about emotions is they describe the contingency the animal is experiencing. So to change those emotions, change those contingencies. We come to the same answer. To change emotions, change conditions. But one way talks about emotions as behavior. Another way talks about emotions as descriptors of those conditions. In both cases, what's important about emotional descriptors is that they tell us that the conditions are adequate or inadequate, and we need to do something about it. Kind of simple, huh?
Yeah, I just lost you for 1 second there, but you're back. And
so either way, whether we look at emotions as behaviors themselves, or we look at emotions as descriptors of the contingencies, the conditions the animal's experiencing. In both cases, what's important is for our work to change those emotional behaviors, we change the environment the animal's behaving in. Happy animals are the result of positive reinforcement contingencies, big skill sets to control those reinforcers, choice to do something or not.
So Trisha's given an example of how this new information about the seeking system is being explored, explained, taught by people. And this is making the use of nose work to activate the seeking system with fearful, anxious dogs. So to kind of layer the information that you've just given us over that, it would be to say with these fearful, anxious dogs, there's punishment in the environment, there's aversive stimuli. So we would be looking to replace that with reinforcers and environment.
That's essentially the idea. People say nose work is good because it activates the seeking system. Nose work is good because it gives the animal more skills to control reinforcers, to use its behavior for what it's evolved to be used for, to control over its environment. And control over the environment, control over reinforcers through your behavior, what it's evolved to do, is what's good about nose work. The seeking circuit may be turned on, but there are thousands of other circuits that are also turned on. We need to talk about those as well to have a complete neuro account. Panksepp's 1 of 8 circuits does not explain why nose work is good at the brain level of analysis. The brain is a complex whole organism that exists in a whole body, all of which is responsive to an environment in which that body is behaving. So I would change that explanation. I would say, we don't see the seeking system, and surely that one is not accounting for the benefits of nose work. The benefit of nose work for fearful or anxious dogs is it gives them more skills to control their environment, to get to positive reinforcement faster. In other words, they're using their behavior for what it's evolved to do. Be effective. And that's a much more accurate description of why nose work is good for dogs that are fearful and anxious.
So can you just build upon this really quickly, the concept of choice, of control? And I don't think you said this directly, but this is my interpretation of everything I've ever learned about it and my application of it, is that this is a primary reinforcer.
Yeah, we can call it a primary reinforcer. We can call control over outcomes is what we're built to do. And when we're fearful and anxious, we are not controlling our own outcomes. We are the victim of the environment instead of the operator. You know, it was a bit of genius that Skinner coined that name, operant behavior. We are born to use our behavior to operate on the environment. And when our operations result in punishment or aversive stimulation, we start to shut down that connection of our own control over our own environment, and we behave ineffectively. But it is our nature to behave for effect. And nose work is excellent because it connects, it plugs dogs back in to their control over the environment. That's what their behavior has evolved to do. You know, I always play that game with my audiences, and I may have done it last time we were together, where I say, what are your eyes for? And people say, shout out to see. What are your ears for? To hear. What are your legs for? To run. What's your behavior for? Silence. Crickets. No matter who's in the audience, trainers, dog trainers, zoo trainers, veterinarians, psychologists, it doesn't matter. We're not taught the answer. And yet a 2.5-year-old child will tell you what their eyes, nose, and ears are for. Behavior is to control the environment. And when we see extreme fear and anxiety, that's an animal who, because of its learning history, is no longer effectively operating on the environment. Nose work gets them back into those primary reinforcers, control over outcomes, reinforcers, to move away from punishers, to move towards positive reinforcers. This is what behavior is meant to do.
And just one other thing you mentioned in the conversation I just mentioned, it was about the ability of antecedents to influence behavior and motivating operations.
Good. Yeah. Motivating operations are a really interesting thing. And it's another account of emotions that Lewin and Hayes wrote a great article on, exploring emotions as motivating operations. You know, if motivating operations are the things that happen, operations meaning the things we do, that make reinforcers, particular reinforcers, more reinforcing or less reinforcing. So, for example, if you offer me chocolate a day after Halloween, that reinforcer is weakened because of the excess of chocolate on Halloween. Or if you ask if I want to listen to cheerful music while I'm at the dentist, then cheerful music is not a very strong reinforcer under those contingencies of discomfort and pain. So reinforcers ebb and flow in strength. And when we arrange for that strengthening or weakening effect of a reinforcer, that's called a motivating operation. That's one of the antecedent influencers over behavior, is to change the value of the reinforcer. So emotions are motivating, can be usefully thought of as motivating operations as well. This is another way of describing it. If, for example, you and I have a lunch date, but I have a fight with my boss in the morning, suddenly the value of going out to lunch is drained. Going to lunch to you is no longer a motivation for getting my work done. Because what happened in the antecedent position, that argument with my boss, has drained that value, has made me sad or upset. So we come back to emotions again when we talk about motivating operations. When we use favorite treats, that's a motivating operation. When we pull out sunflower seeds from a parrot's diet and use them for training only, making sure we still have a balanced diet in the day. That's an example of increasing the value of sunflower seeds to make behavior that earns them more motivating.
So why are diamonds a girl's best friend?
Well, actually, I should do it like Beyonce, right? Like Beyonce. It's because of the motivating operation, absolutely, because they're rare. And so their value goes up. And for some people, the work to get them is increased. Yeah.
So, restless chihuahua here. Heaps, honey. So, we basically don't want to be throwing spaghetti at the wall. Or we do want to be throwing spaghetti at the wall, but we want to make sure that all that spaghetti sticks. Can you explain this idea?
Yes, I'm not in favor of behavioral interventions that are tried very casually. Oh, well, the animal's doing this. Hey, how about you try that? It worked last time I worked with a chihuahua. Or how about you try this? Don't worry, if it doesn't work, we can try something else. That's what I call throwing spaghetti on the wall. And I think that it is unprofessional and it's unethical. It's dangerous for animals, that we need to be more systematic in applying our behavior change science. Rather than just throwing spaghetti interventions on the wall to see what works in this casual way, we need to sit down, we need to get observational data through direct observation, video, interviews with the caregivers we're working with, whether they're dog owners or zookeepers. We need to then formulate hypotheses about what are the signals for the problem behavior and what's the function, what outcome, what does the environment give in the way of feedback that makes that behavior important for the animal. Animals, none of us on the planet repeat behaviors to be ineffective. That's not part of our biology. Like none of us wake up in the morning with our feet on the ceiling. None of us wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be ineffective today, right? Ineffectiveness is not the evolutionary strength of this behavioral tool. It's to be effective, walking through space and time. So when an animal has a behavior problem, it's because it's functional for the animal, even if it's not functional for us. And we need to ask two questions. What's the function? And what are the signals that say to the animal, do that problem behavior now, and there's a functional outcome for you? That systematic approach called functional assessment, that hypothesizing phase that's based on observational data, should always be step one. And then from that hypothesized signal and consequence, we can come up with more targeted interventions. So we're not throwing spaghetti at the wall. We're actually carving our way through these hypotheses to see if we can't replace the problem behavior with something that will be more effective for the animal and for the people caring for the animal. So yeah, I'm not a spaghetti on the wall interventionist. And I will say there's another reason why, is because not only is it casual and unsystematic, therefore less likely to be effective, but it also teaches animals, when they're not effective, to keep doing the problem behavior even though we've changed the environment in important ways. And that's the one message you never want to give a kid or an animal or any learning organism on the planet. You don't want them to learn that they should just keep doing what they do no matter how the environment changes, because that's when you see those stereotypic behaviors and those repetitive behaviors. We want animals to be keenly connected to their environment. When the environment changes, their behavior changes. And it's constantly this motion between moving environments and moving behavior. If you throw spaghetti on the wall in the way of interventions, just trying things nuts and bolts kind of approach, and the animal doesn't change their behavior, each time you do that, you're teaching them to ignore condition changes and keep on doing what you're doing. And that makes for a less flexible animal and an animal that's less responsive to its environment. And that's not healthy. That's not a good learner.
We're going to move on because we've just spent a lot of time on this. This is great because it's been so insightful. And so I know everyone watching this is going to be taking a lot away from it. Just before we move on, just one last thing, just to acknowledge the comments in the chat there from Sylvia, who originally asked this question about Panksepp. So two comments Sylvia's added in there. So as it is just a description and could easily be misinterpreted, this was what I felt about it. It is often used to judge questionable training decisions. She's talking about Panksepp's model. And then she additionally adds, there comes another question into my mind. If behavior is always functional, what means intrinsic motivation then? Is this non-existent?
Yeah, that's a really interesting line of thought. And again, I can send a couple of articles to you, although they're easily Googleable. This debate about intrinsic versus extrinsic reinforcement is more about the cultural conventional wisdom, the cultural fog about why we should be behaving. It's not a strong science position. Pierce and Cameron have done some nice research on how to select for these so-called intrinsic motivators like creativity and persistence. And we can operantly select for those. And we do. When we raise children, we are teaching them through tangible reinforcers what's important, how to use their behavior well. And then we fade those tangible reinforcers and let the naturally occurring reinforcers take over. From one point of view, this is what Carl Cheney, my mentor, said to me. He's always very frustrated. I have a great gif of him just putting his hands on his head and shaking it. No. But I'm persistent in getting the answers that I seek. He said to me, all reinforcers are intrinsic. All reinforcers are hitting the reward centers in the brain, the so-called reward centers. Plural, more than one, the reward centers in the brain. Well, that's true. If we do these functional MRIs, we can see the brain responding to reinforcement in a variety of ways and levels of analysis. So all reinforcers involve the brain. In other words, they involve our biology. If we don't experience on a biological level the benefits of behaving in a particular way, what would motivate us to behave that way again? So when we talk about intrinsic reinforcement, it's really just another way of saying that our entire system, our biology, our genes, our brain, our overt behavior, our emotions, everything is affected by these outcomes we call reinforcers. So what is the value of this phrase, intrinsic reinforcement? I think what it's really referring to is naturally, or how it's usefully referred to is to refer to it as naturally occurring reinforcers. So every time my daughter cleaned her room by Sunday at 9, I didn't have to give her candy, access to the computer, TV time, freedom to go outside and play, although that's where I started it. In the end game, I faded those tangible external reinforcers and connected her behavior to the naturally occurring reinforcers of cleanliness. I would say, "Where's the pink pencil?" And she'd run to the pink pencil location in the drawer and say, "Here it is, Mom, right where I put it." And then I would say, "Isn't it lovely to know where the pink pencil is in case someone comes to the door desperate for a pink pencil?" So we would stand at the threshold and we would all admire the tidy room. And then we would play these games. Can you find your left shoe? Why? Because it's in the left shoe location. And so that became the naturally occurring reinforcers for tidy room. But it started out with tangible reinforcers. Same thing with a dog. I may start a puppy out with tangible food reinforcers as I'm teaching a good recall behavior. I recall the dog from a foot away from me, and then I party and deliver the food with good immediacy and clear consistency. And then I start to slowly, over the repetitions of the recall behavior, start to fade my tangible reinforcers and use naturally occurring reinforcers like now we go through the door, or now we continue our walk, or a rub on the flank, or a clap hands and a good boy. So what is intrinsic reinforcement? I think it's most usefully thought of as naturally occurring reinforcers. And we should always be mindful of thinning out these tangible, artificial, or deliberate reinforcers that jumpstart behavior and learning, and then move to naturally occurring reinforcers over time if that's of benefit to the animal and to us. So I'm not giving my dog food every time it comes when I call. I have a 9-year-old lab and a 7-year-old Shih Tzu, and we go out and I call them and they come back and I just tussle their fur and say, good boy, good girl, and off we go again. Okay. But if I saw the recall behavior breaking down for whatever reason, I might go back to a tangible, deliberate food reinforcer and build that strength of behavior back, and then systematically fade my food reinforcer and transfer to my social, naturally occurring reinforcers. Does that help you organize that concept at all?
It helps me, Sylvia, and anyone else who wants to dive a little bit deeper into Susan's head. Then please feel free to use that chat function to add any further comments. We'll move on though, if that's okay with you, Susan. So hopefully that answered your question, Sylvia, Rose, Sarah, and anyone else that was asking about emotions. We're going to move to some questions asked by Jose Gomes from currently living in Melbourne, Australia, and he wanted to know about some discussion points that have to do with specific techniques we can use in our training. So there's 4 ones that I've written down here. First one, potentially, you've mentioned it, or you mentioned the use of a bridge already, and following that up with a established reinforcer, for example, a food item. Can you talk about this concept that a lot of people are familiar with and use, blazing clickers, and your input on using bridges and markers and following them up with established reinforcers?
Yeah, again, I think I may have a slightly different view than is most commonly discussed. Those markers are secondary reinforcers. They are once neutral stimuli that gain their ability to strengthen behavior by being paired with a well-established, strong existing reinforcer, which that backup reinforcer could either be another secondary or a primary. It's really about strength. So we know, or the account that we use to date is a Pavlovian account, that by pairing 2 stimuli, the click sound or the whistle, which is at the beginning neutral, with a well-established backup reinforcer, the neutral stimulus gains the property of behavior strengthening, its reinforcing property through that pairing. The advantage of that phenomena when it comes to working training behavior is that it allows us to reinforce the behavior with incredible contiguity, that is, immediacy. And research and experience tells us that the more immediate the reinforcer is, the function of the behavior is to the behavior occurring, the clearer it is to the animal what behavior controls that reinforcer. Okay, so where would we need that immediacy? When I'm working very close up near an animal, I can get good immediacy often by delivering food directly. And so if I'm working with a bird on a perch and I've got those the food reinforcers in my hand, and I have the skill to bring them up in a particular way very quickly and bring it to the beak, then the idea of added immediacy that a secondary reinforcer provides is not that important to me, because I'm not losing learning ability by just delivering the food treat, the seed or the pellet to the bird directly. I think where these marker events or bridges, these secondary reinforcers, become very important is when we're working distance work. So when we're working sea lions in the pool, or we're working a dog in the field with sheep, or those kinds of examples, then our ability to use those backup reinforcers is too slow. And the span of time between the right behavior and getting that terminal reinforcer, so to speak, is too long, and the animal loses information about what it is they're doing that controls those outcomes, those reinforcers. So what we see is that people use these markers in a variety of ways that may not be the strongest way. And I think more information is needed, more data is needed. But Steve Martin is the one who coined this term blazing clickers. What we saw in a lot of the zoo facilities we were consulting in is that people would mark those behaviors. They would reinforce those behaviors with the secondary reinforcer and not back them up every time with a well-established strong reinforcer, let's say food for now. It could be other things depending on the individual. And what we saw was that there was an influence on the learner. We saw increased aggression. We saw lack of fast learning. We saw animals, now that they had the choice to just walk away, leaving the training session. And so it was a hypothesis. Is part of the problems we're seeing due to the fact that when you use a bridge and you don't back it up at an extremely high rate, almost one-to-one, could that be the cause of this fallout, this negative outcome? And so we asked people to go to backing up those bridges consistently every time, and we saw those side effects disappear. Animals stayed in the training scenario longer, they learned faster, they remained calmer, there was less aggression. And so he coined the phrase blazing clickers. When you click, 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 but you don't back up each one of those clicks, it's essentially a Pavlovian extinction procedure, where now you take the stimulus that has become a reinforcer through pairing, you sound it repeatedly without pairing, and it's like respondent extinction. It would be like Pavlov sounding the bell tone without putting the meat in mouth. Over the repetitions, the animal stops salivating to the tone. Respondent extinction. So it's really what we would call an empirical question. I say to people, try it. If you have the habit of clicking without backing it up every time, just take 2 weeks to work with your animals, commit to backing it up every time, and see if you get a difference in their discretionary effort, their latency to respond, their leaving the session, and their aggressive behavior. So try it and see what you get. And on my website, behaviorworks.org, the Blazing Clickers article is up there under written works.
Fantastic. And we'll link to the things that you've mentioned so far in the write-up for this web class. So if anyone wants to find these references nice and quickly, I'll do my best to remember them, and we'll link them in the write-up. So some people have communicated, or potentially I've read it in an article talking about this topic, that they were using the clicker as a keep going signal. But
right.
that has a very different meaning than a marker, doesn't it?
Well, it has a different meaning, and it also needs to be a different stimulus. If you're using a clicker to mean that's exactly what I want, here's the backup reinforcer, versus that's what I want, keep doing it, those are two valuable but different communications. I mean, if we just think about the English, that's what I want, food is coming, orient towards the food, versus that's what I want, do it again, are two completely different cues, really. And so we can create those communication pathways with animals, but they need to be different signals. To use the clicker to mean here's food, or to use the clicker to mean do it again, is like going down the highway or the roadway and having a red light mean stop sometimes and go other times. I mean, we couldn't organize our behavior around a red light that meant two things. So keep going signals. I can see how they could be taught to animals. One might argue that the absence of the click, depending on how you use your marker, could mean keep going until you hear the click. Some people have used it that way very well. I think of Chirag Patel from the UK. One of the things I notice about his training is that his dog, Cody, understands that he should continue to do what he's doing till he hears the click. So he doesn't use another signal. If he asks the dog to turn, that dog will continue to turn until he hears the click, and then he orients for the food treat, the backup reinforcer. So, I mean, signals can mean so many different things. It's about, what do you want a signal to mean? Can you use one signal for each meaning? And then how are you going to train the meaning of the signal?
And so Chirag Patel's dog is taking in the information from the environment, and the lack of the bridge, the marker, is communicating to that animal to keep going.
I just have to plug in my computer. Sorry. Keep going. We're all prepared.
Can you build upon keep going signals? I think people are wanting, because a few people have demonstrated interest in this. A few people are wanting to hear potentially, and maybe you might not have much more to add, a bit more of a deeper.
Yeah, there have been times in my training work, or my coaching more accurately, where I thought, gee, a keep going signal would have been really great right there. But then I always fall back on, what did I miss in the training? Maybe I took too big of a leap. I remember one instance, again, it was consulting with Steve Martin at the San Diego Zoo, where the trainers were teaching the elephant to put its front foot up on a rail on a fence, a metal rail. And the fence had 4 rails, and they wanted the foot on the second rail, not on the third or the fourth or the first, on the second. And then they wanted to add duration. So they were at the stage where they were adding duration, and by mistake, the elephant put his foot on the third rail. Now, they had gotten that behavior up to like a 3-minute duration. So when the animal put its foot on the third rail, that was not the right rail. But it already had experienced the criterion of 3 minutes, or however long it was. That might be an exaggeration. The fish is getting bigger. 30 seconds. So we had to wait 30 seconds to tell that animal, no, that's not it. The click in the treat is not coming because it's the wrong rail. If I had had a signal like a no reward marker, or if I had had a signal on the first rail, on the second rail, the right rail, keep going, then maybe I could have given those communications and saved that elephant 30 seconds of waiting to discover that it was the wrong behavior, the wrong rail. So keep going signals, no reward markers, all of these fall in that same category of extra communications beside simply that, here's your food. But then I stopped and thought about it. If we had taught the behavior to a higher level of fluency with shorter duration, maybe we would never have gotten into that predicament in the first place. So I'm not sure that I needed a keep going signal for the right rail and a no reward marker for the wrong rail. Maybe I just needed to get better fluency at lower durations in the first place, more reinforcement history on the second rail for shorter durations in the first place, so that the third, fourth, and first rails were never even an option, more of an errorless learning style. So I don't know really where I fall beyond that. I think sometimes we think we need signals we don't need if we trained cleaner in the first place. If that marker meant continue what you're doing, or if that marker, the absence of the marker meant continue doing what you're doing till you hear the marker, maybe we wouldn't need all these extra signals, or maybe those extra signals add salience, and so they're worth pursuing. I think the jury is out. But I guess I would challenge people to consider for themselves, do you really need another signal, or do you need to train with more fluency at the lower criterion so that errors are not likely in the first place as you increase the criterion? You see what I mean?
I like it. We're going to look back in the chat just a little bit. And just before we do move on, just want to clarify one thing. We've been looking at the clock for an hour 35. We normally cap these at about 2 hours. How are you for time, Susan, today?
I can go way longer than anybody else on this phone if we're talking about behavior. If you're talking about diamonds, then I'm about at my limit. But if you're talking about behavior, I can keep going for sure.
You're free to stay longer than 2 hours, or you want to?
Yeah, no, I can.
So what I'm gonna do, because at an hour and a half, we normally take a break for people to use the bathroom and grab a drink or something. So do you need to go to the bathroom or get anything?
No,
Are you happy?
I'm
going
good.
to ask you next question, guys. I'm just going to jet off for 5 minutes and use the boys' room, and I'll be back. So just looking back in our chat there, Sylvia shares her experience watching a video of a gorilla that she was impressed about. So that's going back a little bit. What is the view, Sylvia? Oh, sorry, Sarah asks, what is your view on reinforcing a mistake in clicking? Must keep your promise or less clarity? Does that make sense?
You know what? As long as you give me permission to keep growing and learning, then I will tell you that today, so far, I think that's much ado about nothing. I think it doesn't matter whether you back up the click one time or you don't back it up, because I don't think one repetition is going to change the animal's understanding of how to control its reinforcers. So I'm happy for people to follow the rule that if you click, you treat whether or not it was a good click or a bad click. And I'm also fine with people saying, oh, don't back up that click because it's just going to strengthen the wrong behavior. I think the more important thing is to not have bad clicks. So once in a while, I don't think it's going to have an impact on the behavioral production for that animal. But if you have to face that dilemma and have a rule about what to do, you're probably having too many errors. And that's the problem, not whether it happens once in a while. What do we do? I don't think it matters. But if you have to keep asking yourself that question, then you probably need to go back and click when the ball bounces and have somebody toss the keys and build better skills with using those markers precisely. So I hope that that's not an unsatisfying answer, and I may change my answer when I see more evidence to the contrary. But I think it should be such a low probability occurrence that it just doesn't really matter. And it may depend on the individual animal. You know, some animals may be more sensitive to that click, and then I probably would feed it. And other animals, you know, it's just, there's a lot of noise in our environment. To think that there's nothing else going on, you know, it's just our environments are not that pure. So I would say the issue is more about how frequently you have the problem and not what you do about it if it's infrequent.
All right, playing catch up here. Frank does say, if you guys keep going, I'll stay all weekend.
Me too. Bring the pizza.
Jose says, going back a little bit now, that some trainers argue that clicking and cueing the next behavior is rewarding enough to keep the bridge strong. Jose, would love to hear what you think about this argument.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're describing, and I've seen it. I have a beautiful video of a very experienced dolphin trainer who is clearly whistling as the bridge and then gives a cue as the backup to the bridge. This was video that I got from Steve, and when Steve asked the trainer how long did he work with that animal with those behaviors before he felt he could use a cue as the backup reinforcer, he said at least a year. So here's I think the science thinking that we need to bring to that question is, we know cues can become reinforcers, if they are paired with strong reinforcers often enough. Okay. So we go back to our Pavlovian or responding conditioning. A cue predicts food is coming in the very same way that a click predicts food is coming. The only difference is one is more contiguous, or one is more contiguous, touching, click, treat, and the other one has a behavior in the middle. Sit, the dog sits, and then the food comes. Nevertheless, we observe that that predictive characteristic of the secondary reinforcer is there in both conditions, click, treat, or ABC, the cue, the behavior, and the outcome, the consequence. So we understand scientifically by thinking about Pavlovian pairing why a cue could carry behavior strengthening power. And that helps us understand that for it to have that behavior strengthening function, it needs to be a cue that has a lot of history for the animal, predicting very strong reinforcers. Those are the cues that become reinforcers, not any cue, but cues that predict reliable, strong reinforcers. Under those circumstances, I think a cue can serve as the backup. But how many people have cues that are that strong on deck with animals that are that savvy, that have that much experience with cues predicting reinforcers so they become reinforcing themselves? That's one question we have to ask ourselves. If you're that trainer, you can do it that way. But what I see is that that level of expertise is not that common. We are all becoming that. We're still in the state of becoming. And our animals are in the state of becoming great learners through contingency training with humans. And what I worry about is that many of us would not see the behavior breaking down when we use cues as backup for clickers fast enough to catch that problem and fix it. And that what we'll get is people who are using cues without carefully monitoring the behavior, the aggression, the latency, the animal leaving the training session. They're not going to see that as cues being weak surrogates for food reinforcers. And they're going to start labeling the animal, putting the cause inside the animal's brain. Well, its seeking system must not be activated, or it's messing with my mind because I've been on vacation for a week, or it's a slow animal or a stupid animal. I mean, I hear people explain animal behavior in these ways all the time. Good people, people who love their animals, people who are me, but just with different information and different commitments to behavior. So I worry about using cues as backups for secondary reinforcers. I worry about using secondary reinforcers as backup for secondary reinforcers for bridges, unless the trainer is skilled enough to see when that breakdown starts and then immediately addresses that issue. I think it's much safer when we're training new trainers and novice and moderate level trainers, when we're training facility-wide, schools, academies, that we have a simpler rule, which is if you mark, back it up with food or some other very well-established reinforcer, and leave cues as reinforcers for sort of a later stage when you know the animal well, you know its behavior well, you know what the breakdown of behavior looks like at the earliest tells, and when you are expert at not blaming the learner for its learning failure. That when you see the animal start to fail, the behavior start to break down, you don't start labeling the animal, using them as the excuse or the explanation. You turn back to yourself and say, okay, the behavior's not as strong as it was, or latency to the cue is longer, or this or that. What am I doing? So I think the characteristics of the trainer are really paramount before I would turn a trainer loose on using cues as backup reinforcers. Does that give you anything useful, Jose?
I feel like you're saying we've got to make sure of implementing these ideas that our observation skills are up to par. And it kind of makes me think about this term that I thought we might bring up today and gets thrown around a lot is the art versus science of training. Does it kind of fit into that category? You need to be this idea that's been created and that gets circulated an artist to kind of have these observational skills to be able to know how to mold what's in front of you.
I mean, you're talking to a scientist. You're talking to a behavior analyst. So I want to operationalize what does art look like, you know? So this is what I think the operational definition, in other words, the observable, unambiguous definition of art is someone who has achieved such a level of fluency with these basic training skills, these critical training skills, that they use them almost without being aware. Their thinking behavior is not engaged. Like when we, again, a driving metaphor, we drive down the lane, we stop at the stop sign, we take a right-hand turn, we pull up the drive, and we wonder, gosh, how did I even get here? I don't even remember passing the stop sign. That's a level of fluency. One might call that artful driving, right? Or if you go into a swerve on a rainy road, the artful driver is able to come out of that swerve without thinking about it. The rest of us are thinking, oh, turn the wheel into the curve. Okay, back off the gas. Don't put your foot on the brake. All of that is still in thinking level. So much, apparently, of the brain's decision-making is happening sub-thought level. So if what we mean is someone like a Steve Martin, a Wouter Stillard, and many others who I could describe as artists, as trainers, what that means to me is that they've achieved such a level of fluency with these critical and unusual levels of unusual skills of observation and response time and being influenced by the animal, reading the animal's behavior as data to move their training plan. When you get to that level and you can do all of that without thinking about it, that's when you get called an artist. So it's not magical. It's describing a level of fluency.
So someone with that level of fluency of injecting a cue as a follow-up reinforcer for a clicker would not proceed if it saw someone.
It would work. Sure. We understand the science behind it, essentially Pavlovian conditioning.
Kelly's just going back a little bit. Kelly was asking a question about, I believe it was the elephant scenario with the foot on the third rung up on the fence.
Yes.
So she wanted to potentially build on this a little bit and say if the cue was misunderstood, so that elephant put that foot on the third rung, how might one end the behavior?
Right.
Knowing that the duration is really good. And we've got that trained.
Right. That's where we talk about the no reward marker. And I sort of put that in under the same umbrella as keep going signals, no reward markers, all of these other signals that communicate to animals how they can control their reinforcers through their behavior. So if we had a no reward marker and we could have said something like, no, and it meant change what you're doing, stop what you're doing and look to me for information. I always tell people, they say, I would never say no to my animal. And I'm like, really? I taught my kids, I taught my dogs, the animals I work with, that no, pick another word. Dumbledore, doesn't matter what the sound of the word is. What's important is what it's signaling. When I say no, it means stop what you're doing and look at me for information. I can use any word, melonhead, doesn't matter. I happen to use the word no because it's common in our language. So if I had a nice, calm, civilized, gentle communication of no, stop what you're doing and look to me for more information, that would have been the time to use it. So that's when I thought, oh, I see a reason for a no reward marker. And then I talked about it with Wouter Stillard. who I know is a friend of yours as well, Ryan. And he said, well, yeah, I mean, you could have used a no reward marker there, or you could have just shaped the behavior so that the animal didn't make that error in the first place. And that's true. I think that was insightful for me. So I don't know if we need the signals, if we train better, or maybe they're handy to have. I don't feel strongly about those extra signals. What I do feel strongly about is when the animal makes a mistake, we ask how we failed as trainers, not how the animal failed as a learner. It's that rat is never wrong culture I grew up in, from those Skinner days, and Wells Hively days at the residential treatment center. The rat's not wrong. The learner's not wrong. And that's good news, because if it is about the learner, there may not be a lot I can do. As long as I take responsibility, then I'm empowered to make changes to help the animal succeed.
And going back to the conversation you had with Valda Stillard, and for those of you who would like to learn more about and learn from this magnificent human being, then there is a past podcast episode between me and Valda as well that you can go back and listen to.
And I agree. Magnificent human being.
And Valda has suggested the possibility of engaging in one of these web classes in the future as well. So look out for that. Now, Valda's and this idea with this rat, is this what we would put in the errorless learning folder in our brain? Is that what we mean when we talk about errorless learning? Can you?
Well, errorless learning is, it's really about antecedent arrangement to reduce errors rather than having animals just thrown into the pool, trial and error. No, not this. No, yes, no. That trial and error approach that is common in conventional wisdom. Just throw the animal in, they'll figure it out. Errorless learning is about arranging antecedents so that the right answer is the more probable answer. Yeah. So I'm a strong proponent of errorless learning. In fact, just the other day, consulting with orangutan behavior, it really became clear to me that errorless learning is important. Arranging the antecedents so the right answer is the most likely answer is important, because sometimes if the animal gives you the wrong answer, there's nothing you can do in response that won't reinforce the wrong answer. So I've had two experiences just in the last couple of weeks where I realized, I'll give you an example with the dog. The dog barks at the door, not because there's really anything outside. I'm pretty convinced of that. It's because barking and jumping like there's a pheasant out there is what gets my husband up, and they go out and toss the ball together. Okay. So it's really my dog's cue to my husband that it's time to go out and play. So my husband decided he'd like to teach the dog to stop barking when he asks him at the door. So what he was doing was getting up when the dog is barking enthusiastically at the door and asking him to sit. But of course, that barking got reinforced the minute my husband turned his head and looked at the dog. So what I was explaining was, there's nothing you can do if he's already barking that won't reinforce the barking. So we need a more errorless learning approach, a more heavily antecedent-oriented approach that prevents the barking in the first place and cues a quiet way, like go get the ball and bring it to me, or something like that. So depending on the situation, I've started to observe that there are behaviors we want to replace. And if once expressed, it's too late, because anything we do at that moment will reinforce that. Any redirection, any interruption, anything we do is going to reinforce that behavior. So the goal then is to arrange the environment so the behavior is not expressed in the first place. That's what errorless learning is about. Reducing errors, and then you're not in between a rock and a hard place about what do I do, because I might reinforce the wrong behavior. Don't get there in the first place.
So I'm just going to jump forward in the chat and then we'll go back, because Jose's just put in a comment about this. He says, currently on the hunt for errorless learning protocol for match to sample training?
Yeah. Look up Terrace. I think Herbert Terrace. It's work from the 70s. And those articles should be readily online. If not, send a message to me or to Ryan and I can pass them to you. It's about teaching discriminations, which matching to sample is essentially a discrimination. Match this and not that. So I think that basic, simple discrimination work in his old articles might be helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, the original work was fascinating. How he even thought of this was so amazing. But he was teaching a simple discrimination between for a pigeon to peck when the light was red and not when it was green. And what he did was the green, which is the non-example, the S minus, the S delta, the one that says don't peck, he brought in by arranging the antecedents around that green to be a fainter color. He only flashed it for 5 seconds instead of, or for a half a second instead of 5 seconds. I'm holding my hand up here. This is so funny to have this feedback. This is the green light, and this is the red light. So he made the saturation less in the green, the non-example, the non-match. He made the amount of time he flashed it less, and the brightness less. And so as he was reinforcing when it was red, he brought in this really fast, low, unbright green until it was full saturation, full 5 seconds, full luminosity, brightness right next to the red, and the animal never touched it. So I think you'll find Terrace's work relevant to your match to sample work.
And you have an article as well about errorless learning on your website, and I think you talked about that example in that article as well.
Yeah, so feel free. Everything on my website is available to all of you to download and do whatever is useful for you. You can reprint articles. You can download the graphics, the little educational videos I call Pocket Science. Anything on the website is there for you to take and use.
Yeah, and please start using Dumbledore and Melonhead. And
Dumbledore Melonhead, I won't.
Trisha asked, KGS, keep going signal, not just teaching duration?
It could be teaching duration in terms of a station behavior, but it can also teach repeat the movement cycle. So that gives us two different ways of measuring behavior. There are many ways. Two of them are duration behaviors. Do what you're doing across time. But there's also movement cycles, like start the behavior, finish the behavior, and then start it again. So a movement cycle would be like a bird flying a loop. Fly one loop, or Chirag's dog Cody doing a turn. Do one turn, and when you come back to center, do it again. That's a complete movement cycle. That's different than a duration behavior, or we conceptualize it differently, commonly. I see that we could describe it differently, but we would describe it as a duration behavior if we said, put your foot on the rail and just hold it there for 30 seconds. So that wouldn't be one movement cycle. A movement cycle would be pick it up, put it down on the rail, take it off. When we add duration, we say pick it up, put it on the rail, and hold. So some behaviors are better described as movement cycles, beginning and ends. Other behaviors are better described as moving through time, duration. Like temper tantrums with kids, we would count not only the frequency, but the duration of the tantrum might be easier than the number of times. Within one bout of temperous behavior, is that 5 tantrums or 1? We would call it 1, but it lasted for 2 minutes. So duration versus movement cycle are two different characteristics of behavior we can measure. We can measure intensity, latency, topography, all these different characteristics. Movement cycles, where we measure frequency, and duration would be the two most common, I think. So I don't know if that helps. I would count continuing to loop as frequency of loop, number of loops, and I would count putting a foot on a rail and holding it there till you hear the click as going across time, duration.
Trisha, let us know if you want that built upon. Linda is going to challenge you to stay here as long as she does. Sylvia says we're having an applied behavior analysis nerd party.
Oh, it would be so much fun to just get together and hang out.
Yeah, an ATA member said to me the other day, he said, if I won $1 million, I would just travel the world and visit all the ATA members and their animals.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. So Jose Juju is happy to report to you that going to a one-to-one bridge backup reinforcer has been a smooth and rewarding journey.
Wow, that's great. Send me video. Send me video.
Jose's got a great YouTube channel. Alana says, how do you approach the challenge of changing something from a punishment to a reinforcer? Example, 2 parrots from different backgrounds living together, one friend's being sprayed with water reinforcing. One finds being sprayed with water reinforcing. The other, I suspect, has had this used as a punishment in the past.
Yeah, great question. Exciting training. Some animals find being sprayed with water, gentle spray, aversive, even if they haven't had a traumatic experience or a force-based experience with it. It's hard to know because one of my birds loves it. No surprise, the cockatoo, who just loves everything that is human-sponsored. And the African gray doesn't like it. It's something I could change, but I haven't taken the time to change. So I really applaud you for being interested in that. I think you have to shape in a way that is so gentle that it's a combination of systematic desensitization and shaping together. So you would pair just the spray bottle at whatever distance from the bird, kept that bird calm and relaxed, and reinforce. And then you'll move. It might even need 2 people. So that the reinforcer is contiguous. And then I would reinforce the bird moving towards the bottle rather than the bottle going to the bird, so that the bird's using its power, its choice to come forward. And then from that, it would be, the smallest, gentlest spray and building. Some birds are happier to have the spray come from above them. Other birds are happier to have it come towards them. I've got a nice video of someone who taught a cockatoo to use their behavior to get sprayed, turned it into a reinforcer, and they found that doing it above and at a distance was best. So it might require the antecedent arrangement of the kind of sprayer that you use so that it's more comfortable for the parrot. So it's going to come in there somewhere with your knowledge of systematic desensitization and positive reinforcement shaping, giving the animal as much power to move towards the spray as possible. There is actually, I'm remembering now, on my Facebook page, which is Facebook.com/BehaviorWorks, if you scroll down, really great videos people have shared with me on that Facebook page. I'm very fortunate to have that big village supporting my work. Scroll all the way down, and you're going to find an example of a macaw who was taught to move into the spray. And I don't remember if that's from the Columbus Zoo under Wouter supervision or if it's from another facility, but it's pretty eye-opening to remember that as much as we can shape with the animals moving towards us or systematically desensitize, giving them the power to move towards the once aversive stimulus, the better. So that old school way of desensitizing where you reinforce the animal for being passive while you bring the stimulus closer is missing the great operant strength of empowering the animal to come closer to the sprayer. And that one difference might make all the difference in your success.
It's like one of those human showers you can buy now that has adjustable heads and shower things at different heights.
Sounds delightful.
Replicate that for your parrot. We're going to go back now to our list of questions. The other area that Jose was interested to learn about. We talked about keep going signals and blazing clickers, two other areas, and potentially they are included in what we've talked about with regards to how we might clump them. But these are end of session signal and jackpots.
Good ones. These are things I work hard to try and figure out what their usefulness, their utility is. End of session signals are very individual. I have seen many animals who benefit from an end of session signal if it's a cue for and go work on that enrichment that I've left you. I have seen animals who, when you use an end of session signal and you're the more reinforcing stimulus in the environment, so you leaving is a loss for them, then I've seen it be a cue for unwanted behavior. So I think, number one, it's individual, a study of one. And number two, that signal needs to mean I'm leaving, we're done, but there's other great stuff available. If it means that there is a deficit of stimulation, then you might not want to use one. So that's my understanding to date. Jackpots, I don't think they're doing what we think they're doing. I don't think that let's start at the beginning. So we'll be very systematic in this discussion. We have to first operationalize what is a jackpot, because people are using that term differently. The way that I'm using it is that when the animal happens to throw a super criterion performance that is higher than the criterion you are working on, and you supersize your reinforcer in magnitude, that's the definition of the jackpot that I'm using right now. But we can talk about other definitions as well. But it doesn't make sense, and this is something I do want to model for you. It doesn't make sense to launch into a discussion without first being sure we're defining something similarly. That's a discipline. I almost missed that opportunity right now to start answering what I think about it when I'm not sure we're even talking about the same thing. So I have to remind myself to say, what do you mean by jackpot? If you mean what I typically mean, which is I'm working at this level of a criterion, the animal comes up to this level, so I throw a magnitude reinforcer there. Why would I do that? My rationale would be because I want the animal to repeat that super criterion again. So I'm going to hit it with big reinforcement. What I observe is the animal comes back down to this criterion on the next rep. I don't see them repeating the supersized one. I think you get the super criterion by patiently going from approximation to approximation. So then what's the deficit? If we're not getting the desired outcome, which is that the animal continues to repeat behavior at this unexpected higher level, then when we give a magnitude reinforcer, we are robbing the animal from the opportunity to have reinforced repetitions to get to that level, one repetition at a time, because we will satiate the animal faster, sort of blowing the whole pouch on that one supersized behavior. Then they don't repeat it, and they're less motivated because they're satiated to continue to train one approximation at a time. So when an animal that I'm training or trainers I'm coaching get a supersized criterion, I say stay the course, reinforce it with your normal amount of reinforcement, which may itself be a variety of magnitudes, because variety itself is often reinforcing, and then just continue, expect the animal's going to come back down and work your way up systematically. I think what jackpots do, though, the benefit is that we love giving them. It's a loving moment to say, wow, you are so brilliant. I'm going to give you more. That's how much I love you. That's how much you impress me and I'm admiring of you. That makes us feel great, and that's never a bad thing. So feeling happy describes that emotion, describes the contingency of the animal just doing something super well. And for the animal, it makes us, we're paired with this heavy reinforcer, this heavy amount of reinforcement. And so they like us better too, meaning they might come to us faster to train. Their latency to respond to our cues may be shorter. They may supersize again in the future because they're going to use discretionary effort because they enjoy working with us. So the benefit of the jackpots is everybody feels happy. But whether or not it actually selects for that incidental higher criterion performance, I don't see that it does. So the negative is satiation, which robs us of the ability to build on repetitions.
So Jose is just wanting to build on that a little bit more and add another cog. He said, do you agree that bridging and jackpotting means changes in the association between the bridge and the reward, but not necessarily on the behavior that preceded it?
That's an interesting use of a jackpot, is to strengthen the meaning of the marker. I think to do that, it would need to be fairly consistent. So the super quantity would need to be fairly consistent, not just once off. And if it's fairly consistent, then you would be reducing the number of repetitions in a training session, unless you're working with an animal that eats and forages, works to eat for many, many hours a day. Like many dogs will continue to train, for longer than you are able to train them because they keep eating those treats. Many, many horses or elephants continue to eat long hours through the day. So the training sessions can be very, very long. They don't satiate quickly. So in those cases, it's a different set of decisions would follow. But to condition a marker, the stronger the reinforcer, the stronger the marker will be. As a general rule, yes. As a jackpot moment, incidentally, I don't know that it would have a big effect in the long run.
Hopefully that answers your question, Jose. Let me know if you want us to build on that at all. I'm pretty interested to move on to the next kind of area that people were really interested in learning about from you. And that is tips, techniques, input on teaching other people this information. People who are potentially less passionate about the ethical side of the equation, or lay people or children, or just more challenging teaching situations, I guess. What assistance and insights from your experience can you offer?
Yeah, it's really one of my favorite areas, is how to teach the humans that are working with the animals. And because, of course, we're always working with humans when we're working with animals. And I'm most interested in working with people who are interested in humans. The people who I have about 20 or more teacher assistants that help me with my online courses. And I don't pursue people who say they work with animals because they don't like people. I'm looking for people who like people. So it is a great topic, and it is as intriguing as any other animal's behavior. We follow the same principles and laws of behavior. And so if we apply our perspective that the rat is never wrong, then when we're working with people, they at that moment are our rats. And if they're not behaving as expected, we have to think about what we're doing. So that's my major tip, is that just like with the animals that you're training, when you're working with a human who isn't doing as you think they should or as expected, you have to ask yourself, is the environment set up for the animal to know to do that? Are the signals clear? Is the animal capable, the learner, the human, capable of doing what you're asking? Do they need more skills, prerequisite skills, or a shaping program to build a lesser criterion first and to build on that? So I have to say that when I'm working with humans, I really do ask very similar questions about what I'm doing. Do I have their reinforcers? That's a big one. There's someone who I don't work with anymore because we agreed I don't have that person's reinforcers. If you don't have the reinforcers, you can't teach them. You can't influence them, right? So that's one of the most basic questions to ask is, do you have control over the environment so that you have that person's reinforcers to deliver when the right behavior at the right criterion is emitted? And then I have some good sort of pop psychology books that have been very influential for me. One is Crucial Conversations, which I highly recommend, because it has, once you get past the first few chapters, which are very corporate, it has a very good tool set for working with people about how to establish common goals. If you don't have a common goal, there's no sense talking because you're not heading towards the same destination. So when you discover you don't have a common goal, like an ethical debate, you don't have a common goal to use the least intrusive, let's say, solution, then you have to come up with another goal that preempts that one. And you have to keep working your way back up till you find a common goal. If you don't have a common goal and you don't have the person's reinforcers and you don't have any control over their antecedent environment, I say, go home, right? You're not going to pound it into them. So I'm one of these people who relatively easily assess whether I have a point of influence. And if I don't, and this is something funny because when I work with Steve, he's in there trying to convince, and that man is unbelievably persistent. And I get, my assessment is I have no influence here. Then I just lean off that pedal and I might try and come in another way with another person, write an article that might be influential to others. But I don't keep banging my head on the human wall if I don't have any source of influence. We say on my in my co-instructor, my TA's group, that if when the list of people who are desperate to learn from us, when that queue is empty, then we can turn to the people who are not interested in learning from us and see if we can have influence there. But to take your time, so this is the world just according to Susan, to take your precious time and knowledge, trying to convince someone who doesn't want to learn from you when the queue, the line to learn from you is like wrapped around your house 50 times, just doesn't make good sense to me as a social marketer, as a marketer of social ideas, social norms and behaviors. So I'm a little bit of a strategist in this way. I would rather spend my time with you folks than to spend the same 2 hours with somebody who's positive that punishment is best because it's fast. And that I have wind will not be influenced by my data, my science, my experience, my commitment. So in the time I spend debating, I could be teaching 40 other people. I'm going to move to those 40. But other people enjoy the debate. They enjoy the fight. They enjoy the increment of influence they may have. And I applaud them. It's just not, for me, a smart way to spend my time. So that's one bit of advice. I continue to grow my skills in working with people to find the common goal and then come down from the common goal to action, planning from there. Another great book besides Crucial Conversations is Other People's Habits by Aubrey Daniels. That is a very behavior analytic approach to changing human behavior. But it all centers around this basic idea that if you don't have an animal's reinforcers and you can't control that antecedent environment to make the right behavior easier, I don't know that it makes sense for you to spend your time there. Will animals continue to suffer because we have not influenced in those areas? Absolutely. But will we benefit other animals in a different venue by being with people who are waiting for our information? Yes. And we have to have the resilience to turn away where we are not influential and put all of our effort where we can be influential. And I think we have made incredible inroads in changing the cultural fog, the conventional wisdom together in the last 20 years. Trainers, behavior analysts together have made phenomenal changes in what people understand is the right thing to do. And we just have to keep working. Yeah. If you feel sad or frustrated, use that emotional flag as a descriptor of your contingency and work somewhere else where you have more influence.
The world according to Susan, guys.
I'm so focused, and I have had this focus the whole time I've been working in animal behavior. It was just clear to me very early on because I got such terrible, vile pushback from the lay experts of the day when I started to bring in behavior analysis information, shaping, positive reinforcement, and the ABCs, and unlabel me. When I started talking about those 4 things, I got such horrible pushback from people whose vested interest was in keeping new information out because they were their whole identity was based on their misinformation, that I learned very quickly to turn away and move to the light, move to the vast masses of people who wanted this information. So it's worked really well for me. But I do feel the pain of the animals that I turn away from. I feel that pain. It's inescapable.
It's hard to believe for us that people would push back on you because we are so enjoy the way your mind works around all of the science and concepts and how much benefit the information you disseminate to us has on our lives and our animals' life and the people we touch. One thing you mentioned in the podcast that I think is really worth mentioning here, once again, because, guys, it influenced me and I foresee that it might be beneficial for you as well, is that you said that you have compassion for these people that were asking to change their entire belief system. Can you just talk to this?
That's good, because compassion is a label. What does it look like behaviorally? Behaviorally, for me, what it looks like is I don't call them names. I remember that I didn't always have this information or this last 20 years of incredible experience and influence by all of you and my training mentors, that I will change what I do to give them the information so that they can succeed in learning it. So I don't ever think, well, that's an exaggeration. Publicly, I would never think aloud, what? Are you kidding me? I just said that. Or, what? How could you put that monkey next to that cockatiel? Are you insane? I just saw a video of that. Or, I don't. What I just keep reminding myself is every mistake they are making, I could have made had I not had access to this information. Because so much of the wrong information is logical. It has an appeal. There's something about it that's sensible. So I try and remember, for both the non-human animals and the human animal, people are behaving because of their genetics, their learning history, and their current conditions. When I see somebody behaving in a way that is counter to what I'm teaching or what I believe or what they should know, given how much time I've spent with them, I remind myself they are behaving according to their learning history, and I just need to figure out how to teach better. Or I need not to teach them. I need to lateral them to another teacher. And I do that often. There are many times when I'll say to Steve or to Wouter or to Lee McGuire, who helps me lead up the online course, I will say to them, I can't do this. I am the wrong tool for this job. Can you work with this student? So if I'm failing, I'm not going to make the student pay that price. I can rethink what I'm doing. And if I don't have what it takes, then I move them to another teacher. And I feel okay doing that. That doesn't reduce my sense of confidence. It just shows me how varied the demands of our learners are. And I can't be the tool for every learning job. I'm thankful to have a village of people who I can move them over to. And then they can move students over to me. So by compassion, what I mean is I never forget that they are me. That even if it's an animal, a non-human, I have that same perspective. If that dog isn't doing what I expect, that dog is me. What information is it missing? I assume that the dog, the animal, has a reason, that it's inadvertent reinforcement, that I'm missing something about the environment. I don't jump down the learner's throat to find what's in their brain or in their heart or, yeah. So I don't know if that's a helpful way of defining what compassion is, but it's just that patience and that trust that a person is misbehaving for a reason.
It's helpful for me and I think it's a quote that I'm going to replay in my mind a lot. These are people who are me with different information.
Yeah. I used to say they're me with less information. And one of my online students wrote to me and said, I want you to rethink that statement, because maybe it isn't even less information. Maybe it's just different. And I fought back. I said, no, it's less. It's less. They're missing this and I can give it to them. But the more I chewed on it, the more I understood that if we were to measure my information in a bucket, their bucket may be just as full, but it's very different information. So I started to adopt that refined way of thinking about it. Yep.
Great. And I remember back to 2010 when I met you and Steve, and I was very much in a learning phase, as I am now, but I was just super hungry. And I was asking you guys, what do you read? What do you do? What do you do on your days off?
I remember it very well.
And you both said crucial conversations, and it has been like, if we can safely say this, it's been like a Bible to me. It has, and I've got a list on my phone of questions from that book, Crucial Conversations, that I go to regularly. So I just wanted to second that because I think there's so much benefit.
I would be very interested in that list if you would share it with me. Yeah. It might be a nice rubric for me and my teachers.
Do you use Evernote by any chance?
I do. I've never used it as a crowdsource. I've never used it as a share. So we'll have to work on that. Cool.
Unfortunately, Nicole and Kyle have had to leave. They are in Australia. It's what is it, 9 a.m. there.
Oh.
So they're
off you go.
Play with some animals at work and implement their newfound inspiration. So just going back now, Jose was asking if we could build upon Crucial Conversations and other people's habits with any more book references or you have for novice and experienced traders.
Yeah, for me, that's really a beautiful request, because I am starting to feel impatient. I'll share with you a certain sense of urgency that people need to go beyond just the practice of training and build their science knowledge as well. I asked my teacher assistants this year, what book have you read? When you meet those students in our class, how will you know more than they do? What have you done this year to be able to answer them at a higher level than last year? Every year, we need to keep bringing more information in. So when you ask for more books, that reads to me that you're looking for more than the experience alone provides. And the experience, of course, is unbelievably important. But I think that we have to keep bringing in more academic, if you will, more academic knowledge to our work as well, to really become experts of behavior change. So I would recommend that everybody read a good introductory undergraduate learning and behavior textbook. So I recommend Paul Chance, who's a wonderful friend of mine. All these books are called Learning and Behavior. They're just by different authors. It's kind of funny. It would be fabulous for you to read that book, just a chapter a week or a chapter a month, and get some of that basic information in, and then watch how it'll influence your experiential part you're doing. And then a more advanced book would be Pierce and Cheney. Pierce and Cheney. And Chini's my mentor, who I've been talking about. That's a more advanced learning and behavior book. And it's very exciting because at the very same time that I have become really clear that learning is our nature, they put the word biology on their learning and behavior book. It's I've forgotten the new book, Learning and Behavior, A Biological Approach, or something like that. So you can see the field is moving in that direction. Here's a tip. When I give you the references to these academic books, these so-called secondary sources, buy the old editions. Don't buy the new editions. Buy the old editions. You can buy the old editions for 30 cents on Amazon. Literally $1.25 on Amazon. And the difference between the new and old is so minor. It's really, that is the result of publishers making money. When those academic texts go for $280, you don't need it. You can buy 50 cents and get the old edition, and it'll give you everything you need. So go on Amazon and look for old editions. So Learning and Behavior by Chance is number 1. Learning and Behavior by Pierce and Cheney is number 2. And then I also recommend, oddly enough, a special education text, because we are the appliers of the behavior science in the learning and behavior textbooks. And you will have no problem seeing the relevance to your non-human learners if you read a special education textbook. So a great one is Miltenberger. I think he's Ray Miltenberger. Again, an old edition. And just enjoy. It will be so relevant to programming, intervening on animal behavior. And then let's see, other influential books. My good friend Susan Schneider's book, The Science of Consequences. And that will really give you fluency in describing how you don't need brain explanations. What is the relevance? We're not working with the brain directly. And we know the brain is going wherever behavior goes. We know that the source of behavior we focus on is the environmental source. We know that the brain doesn't cause behavior. It's a correlate. We know the environment is not a single cause. It's a correlate. Genes are correlates. So if you read her book, the main point is consequences are everywhere. They're influencing brains, genes, and the environment. So we can stop appealing to the sexy science sisters and stick with our science, changing behavior by changing consequences, because consequences are influencing all that internal biology as well. She does a beautiful job of making that case. Very exciting book. And funny, too. She's so funny. With her little, you just have to read it. Easy to read. Again, set yourself a target. Make a program. I'm going to read a chapter each week, and then I'm going to email Susan to tell her I succeeded. That'll be my reinforcer. So that's a great one to put on the list. So I think that's probably the crucial conversations. Other people's habits are about interpersonal. Paul Chance and Pierce and Cheney for learning and behavior science. And then a special ed textbook to get a feel for the really sharp appliers, like Miltenberger, or another one is Alberto and Troutman. These are all really good applications. I mean, if you can change the behavior of a child with severe autism, then the lessons are going to be very relevant to working with any other behavior, because children with autism are just extreme in their behavior. So the skills it takes to teach and for them to learn are excellent skills. I always say they don't learn in spite of us, they learn because of us. And the same is true for the animals we're working with. So anything that applies to great teaching of humans is going to apply to great training of non-human learners. So that probably will fill up your reading list for the year.
That was fantastic. I'm very lucky to get to go to the New Zealand Behaviour Analysis Conference after this webinar today and hang out there.
Very great. Please say hello to any of my colleagues there.
Will do. Susan, do you have any plans to come out to Australia in the next wee while?
I do. Although it's kind of a nutty thing, talk about mistakes. I had a commitment to do Clicker Expo in Denmark and a commitment to go to Australia. Is it Adelaide? To do APDT. And they came one weekend after the other, and they both asked, is it okay? And I said, oh, sure. I'll go from Adelaide to Denmark because I'm already out there. So what's another plane to go from Adelaide to Copenhagen? Little did I know. But I have a globe on my desk now. So before I say, oh, I'll be there, I look at the globe to see where on earth am I taking myself. So I'm going to go to Adelaide in the end of October for APDT, and I would love to meet you there. And then I'm going to fly back to San Francisco and then go to Denmark because that's the shortest route. Oh my gosh. But I will never make that geography mistake again.
Trisha's going to be there. And she's
excellent.
To meeting you. And New Zealand, Karen Drummond mentioned something recently. You can talk to her.
Yeah, I have had the privilege of working for Karen several times, 3 or 4 times over the years, and I'm very happy to work with her again. She's a wonderful, wonderful host, and the people in her village are phenomenal. I declined to go to New Zealand from Adelaide only because I need to come back to the States to go to Denmark this time. But I'm always happy to try and make that happen another time. Absolutely. You know, I work with the New Zealand Aviation Security bomb detecting dogs. Such a privilege to work with those handlers and trainers. And so it's always nice to come and work with dog trainers, work at aviation security. I haven't worked with zoo people there, so I'd like to do that as well. So let's keep pushing for that, maybe in 2019.
Let's do the zoo thing for sure.
Good.
I'll connect with Karen about that.
Good.
Sylvia's looking forward to seeing you in Austria at Nicole's place next year.
Oh, yeah. Austria and Germany before Austria. So that'll be great.
Jose's looking forward to seeing you in Adelaide.
Great, great.
And Kyle Wiggins, who just left, I'm not sure if he mentioned something about asking you to come out to Kangaroo Island.
When?
No.
Let's do it.
I'm not sure. I'll ask him to touch base with you again.
2019's wide open.
Coercion and Fallout by Murray Sidman is also great.
Fabulous. Thank you. Who said that?
Sylvia
from
Germany, who you'll meet at Nicole's place.
Good. Yeah, really fabulous. He was one of these again. What did you call Wouter? They had a lot of
marvelous person.
Marvelous human being. Sidman really is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary work, and anything you can read of his will matter, but that was certainly one of his pinnacle contributions.
I have to make sense of this after the web class. Louise says, Melon Head, we have to go. So the Brooklyn Zoo team, who I've had the pleasure of being heavily involved with over the last wee while, are going to go and do some training.
Good. Enjoy.
Not knew you were in Germany before. So Sylvia, who's currently in Germany and says she's going to see you in Austria, wants to know what more information about your Germany trip.
Yeah. Sylvia, if you want to email me, I don't think it's on my website. That's where most of the things are. I would need to go to my mail to find out who the person is. And I'm not in my regular office to have it written down. But somebody involved in dogs. Is it someone named Christine? With an H, maybe? But anyway, if you were to email me at sgfriedman@icloud.com or from the behaviorworks.org website, there's an email interface there. I can tell you more about it. And check my website first and make sure that it's not up there. But yeah, somebody's bringing me in together hand in hand with Gernot and Nicole. So Germany first and then Austria. I'll be doing the basic LLA stuff in Germany, and then Nicole and Gernot have me doing some other particular topics in Austria. And in Austria, I have to say, Jesus Rosales Ruiz will be there. Mary will be there. So he is
Awesome.
a phenomenal expert of behavior change. So I would not miss him.
Just wanted to do a time check, Susan. We've been going for 2 hours and 40 minutes. How are you feeling?
It's crazy. I'm good. Are there more questions?
There are more questions, so it's completely
let's see if we can zip through a few more.
Okay, cool. So just to build on this idea of how we influence others who potentially aren't as interested in the ethical side of things, and we discussed about the opportunity cost of discussing things with them versus
nice way to put it.
Talking of your village. I think the question from one of our members, Shao from Melbourne as well, potentially, and other ATA members, and from my experience, I know this from my own experience, we might be in organisations where our income is tied up within this space, and our values and ethics might be compromised potentially based by our inability or need of new ways of manoeuvring in that space to influence people with different points of view. Do you have any input and suggestions for people who find themselves in that slightly altered version of the previous question?
I think that's a very fair point to bring up. I've been lucky enough to have this boldness and then the environment, the space to act on that boldness. So the joke is that I always have a suitcase under my bed in case I need to split. And I had it under my bed when I got my PhD. And I had it under my bed for the first 20 years that I was married to Neil. But by 20 years and things were still going good, I unpacked it. It is so fair to say, I can't leave this zoo. This is my livelihood. And there's still using an ankus on an elephant or a camel, and I'm not having influence over that. I think that really is a very tough situation to be in, where you can't easily leave and you don't have the influence you need. And I guess my only advice, I don't know what to do. I don't have a simple answer, but I guess what I would say is that one approach would be to define your space smaller. I could see myself defining my space small enough that it did have influence. So maybe it's just the animals I'm working with or my sessions with those animals. That's a possibility. Continuing to find what other people's reinforcers are to be sure that the reason why they're not being influenced isn't because of something you're doing that you could do better. So I would keep trying to get more skilled and effective at influencing other people, finding the common goal, and then negotiating those changes. But the bottom line may also be that sometimes you just need to bite the bullet and change to people who are more compatible, facilities that are more compatible. So I guess my advice is to narrow your definition of space so that it is where you have simpatico between you and your colleagues. So maybe they're doing something on the other part of the facility, but when you work with your animals, you don't do it that way. And to re-examine your own skill at influence to see that you're not asking for too much with too little reinforcement. I have new bumper stickers that say celebrate approximations. And I really meant it for human behavior because we're already well versed in celebrating animal learning approximations, but I'm talking about our movement, if you will. And then sometimes you just need to bite the bullet and do that hard thing. I've had this conversation with many people over many situations, and it's just really difficult when you are not well matched with the facility or the space you're working in. It is a very difficult situation.
Yeah, that's it's a tough decision to make, isn't it? And
it is.
We have had ATA members make that decision in the time I've been making running this venture. So we understand if you wanted to discuss those points. Jake, who's just who might still be here, who's just says he's nearly on his way out, wanted to know, because he's got some parrots and he wanted to know things that he could do to help set his parrots up for success when going to the vet.
Yes. I have a lot of articles on my website that are general training, of which the veterinary application is just one. Barbara Heidenreich is the person who's done a lot of DVDs on medical behaviors for parrots. It's sort of her thing. So I would look up her work, Barbara Heidenreich. It's Good Bird Inc. And I would not hesitate to get those DVDs and take a look at towel training, injection training, and those kinds of things. And then I will also tell you, because I've been pretty disclosing up until this point, that my feeling is sometimes the best we can do is just bring that animal to the vet and have the vet do a very effective capture and restraint, do their procedure, and then set that animal down on the table or on the floor, wherever you think they'll be more comfortable. Wait for the animal to rouse its feathers, collect itself, and then offer your hand and get out of there. Because sometimes we can't train realistically for every instance of every behavior we need. And when that's the case, then my feeling is the best veterinary care is expert capture, restraint, procedure, and leave. I had a parrot who was uncomfortable in the veterinary office, and the veterinarian, bless her heart, was trying to make friends with the parrot first by giving him peanuts. But he was too uncomfortable in that place to take peanuts. And I finally said to her, just get the towel on him and let's do this procedure and be done. That would be less intrusive for that animal than trying to do this training interaction at that time. So I wanted to just throw out that it would make sense to me if you just made the visit as unintrusive and as quick as possible, and then relied on your personal trust account with that parrot to not bankrupt the relationship. Because whenever I have done it just speedy and get it done, I let the animal find its own feet first. Then I offer my hand. I don't chase them. I give them power to operate. They get back on my hand, and they have never held a grudge that I'm in that room or that I'm helping in any way, because I had this big reinforcement bank account prior to that visit. If you really wanted to get into it, though, Barbara's work will help you. And then doing things, if you have a willing veterinarian, like bringing the bird in, just like you would a dog, bringing the bird in and out again. So there is a no-cost visit. You know, you just go in, they see it's fine, nothing aversive happens, you get back in the car, you go back home. Those kinds of things. Very similar to with a dog. It's a big time investment, and it's very worthwhile. But you can get away with less if you need to, as long as your bank account with that bird personally is very full. Then they can take the withdrawal, they're resilient, they bounce back, and you're home before you know it. So I could see the need for both strategies.
And that kind of builds into Alana's question, who just asked if there was any other veterinarians here. I'm not 100% sure, Alana, but she said, do you have any resources or references for ABA being used by vets in vet clinics relating to training for veterinary procedures like blood draws, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of veterinarians who are bringing behavior into their practices now, who themselves take my online course. Every year for the last 15 years, veterinarians have come. And then there is, of course, the veterinary behaviorist licensure or diploma. So some are actually specializing in behavior, medical and behavioral sort of interacting together. So I don't know of veterinarians in your area particularly. I mean, I do know some veterinarians in Australia and New Zealand. I don't know what particularly that they're working with now. Do you, Ryan, know of any to refer to?
I know of people doing behavior stuff in vet clinics.
Right. That's another solution. Yeah, is
Um,
bringing in behaviorists to be part of that practice.
so Kate Mortimer
Oh,
in
yes.
Melbourne.
She was one of my students. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. And she has done a podcast with me as well, so you can find her
Cool.
contact details on the ATA website. And I don't, Susan, are they bringing in this concept in America, and maybe they're bringing it in under different guise, but the force-free veterinary?
Oh, yes. I'm part of that group. I'm glad you remind me. That's Marty. Yeah. So if you Googled that force-free veterinarians, I'm forgetting Marty's last name right now. But he's a veterinarian who has gone worldwide with this force-free approach. And there's probably a way to search for a list of who the members of that group are.
There you go.
Yeah.
I've Googled force-free New Zealand, and thus far, in my own personal research, not to say it doesn't exist, haven't found anything here. But I do know that in Australia there are a number of organisations involved in that particular.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the greatest action proponents of stress-reduced veterinary care is Sophia Yin. And I highly recommend any of her products. It's mostly dog and cat centric, but Sophia Yin, who passed away a few years ago, very sadly, but not before she left an incredible legacy. And I really appreciate her expression for it. It's not about free from any aversive. It's about reducing aversive stimulation. So reduce stress is her catchphrase, and her books and her videos are fabulous, really great. Sophia Yin. So that might be another reference too.
We've got Kelly here who has gone for a certification process to become force-free. It was offered for free for her studies, which is really cool. Fear-free, Kelly says.
Fear-free. Does she know Marty's last name? The veterinarian who started that? Fear-free?
Kelly, do you know Marty's last name?
I can look it up, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose you if I do.
Yeah. A couple more questions. We'll fire through these ones nice and quickly.
Okay.
Lainey Kun asked for. So Lainey's playing with this idea, relatively new to shaping, and she's been told about a rule of thumb for successive approximations. You want 80% success rate before moving on.
Sorry, I'm making faces. How unprofessional. Yeah.
No. Can you just talk to this?
Yes.
Rule of thumb for when to move on to the next successive approximation when shaping behavior.
It's not 80%. This is so interesting. I don't know what's bringing this up again. And it may have been an Australian or a New Zealand student. Somebody asked in my online class last night the same question. It was a horse trainer. Let me tell you about this 80% thing. I'm so glad you give me the opportunity. I think it's a terrible misunderstanding of a special ed criterion. In special education, expert appliers of behavior analysis, we have 80% as the criterion for defining mastery of a skill. So when we work with a child with autism and we're teaching them to tie their shoes, we will give them 10 opportunities to tie their shoes. And if they do it correctly 8 out of 10 times, we can check that off as a mastered skill and move on to the next objective. Okay. I think this is just my guess, but I think that got misunderstood as a criterion for when to move to the next approximation. I think it was confusion. Numbers are handy, so we could see the allure of numbers. But here's why I make that face that is now on video forevermore, is because if you go for an 80% criterion on an approximation, that means you've asked for that approximation 10 times. you are going to over practice that approximation so that the natural variability that animals, all of us, bring to repetition is going to get narrower and narrower, making it harder for the animal to do the next approximation. So when we practice something 8 out of 10 times, that reinforcer 8 times is information. That's what you want me to do. Only that, just that. Okay, I've got it. That. And then we're asking for the flexibility to show us a little bit more. But where is the flexibility to do a little bit more going to come from when we've just reinforced 8 repetitions of something? It's a lot. So I would use Steve Martin, and I've actually in shaping with kids, we've used the same description. And it was a surprise and a pleasure to hear Steve use the same vernacular. When an animal performs an approximation without hesitation, then you start to look for the next closer approximation. Okay, so no hesitation. What does that look like for an individual animal? Depends on the individual we're working with. But if they respond correctly and easily, comfortably, no hesitation, even one time, you can move on to the next approximation. Usually it's 2 or 3. But if it's 8, then that natural variability that our nervous systems have wired in to keep our behavior flexible and available for selection by consequences starts to get rigid. We narrow down. And then they're less likely to give us a little wiggle to select it with reinforcement and go closer to the final goal, if that makes sense. So I think 8 out of 10, 80% means 8 out of 10. That's too much repetition. Go for 2 or 3. Use the no hesitation criterion and move on.
Beautiful, Lainey. Hope when you watch the replay, because I know you're not currently present, that proves beneficial to that question. Just 2 more, super quick. Linda asks, she'd be very interested to know how you specifically use PREMAC in working with non-canine animal learners. Yeah,
I mean, we use PREMAC with each other all the time. I think it's very obvious with children. So it would be something like, finish cleaning your room and then you can come down and we'll go toss a ball or go for a run or a bike ride. So that's one activity that is a higher probability performance, is used to reinforce a lower probability reinforcement performance. So empty the dishwasher and then you can go and practice your flute or something. So we do it with non-human animals and human animals alike. It's your self-management skills are often based on PREMAC, where you say, I'm going to do this hard thing on my desk before I do an easier thing. And actually, I recommend the reverse when it comes to hard work, that you're procrastinating. Hello, pup. Mine is here as well, somewhere by my feet.
Stretch, turn around, and go back down.
Yes. What great stimulus control you have with that dog. So what I recommend often with humans is the sort of the reverse. I say, get yourself to reinforcement faster. So do the easy tasks first, and that will build the behavioral momentum to do the hard. If you PREMAC it and say, I'm going to do the hard one to get to the easier one, the more reinforcing one, you may procrastinate and never do the hard one. So very often I reverse the PREMAC and ask people to snowball those reinforcers to give them the initiative to do the hard thing. Does that answer the question? It's when you reinforce a lower probability behavior with a higher probability behavior.
And have you used it much or can you provide an example in a non-human animal and a non-canine animal?
Let's see. Yes. They're everywhere. Let me think about a good example. Maybe something as simple as sit at the door, sit, and then the door opens and you're reinforced with the freedom of going outside.
Cool. We'll move on to one last question. So this is from someone who's just started working with bird of prey. And it's a question about motivation and strategies they can implement. They want to know about types of reinforcement for bird of prey that shows no real preference over any type of meat. So what strategies can they use to move forward in their situation?
So those are motivating operations. How can we make the meat you're offering be more reinforcing? And so it's things we're going to do in the antecedent position to make the meat you have more worth working for from that bird of prey point of view. Really, the experts, Ryan Bowder, Steve Martin, more than I. But I would say some of the things that I've learned from them and observed is, for example, doing the training before their meals. So they're working for their daily diet, that the diet is not restricted significantly, but that the diet itself is used for training interactions. So they get their full healthful diet, but only in response to the training requirements. And then trying to have one type of meat be held out only for training so that it gains more value because it's in deficit. So maybe you would use Mises pieces, mouse bits, or or chicken, not chicken, sorry, baby chicks, as separate from the BOP, the bird of prey diet, so that you're trying to create a favorite food because it isn't all available all the time.
Cool. I know Nicole's had to leave to go to work on the sunny coast in Australia, but we'll make sure she hears that in the replay. And just Linda's wanting to build on that pre-Mac answer. She's the one who asked the question. So saying she's used it with horses and dogs, and now she's training tortoises, and wants to potentially get an example of application with an exotic animal, I think is what Linda's seeking.
Yeah, I mean, with some exotic animals, it would be exactly like as horses and dogs. But with tortoises, I would probably continue to use vegetable matter as the main reinforcer. And I haven't had an opportunity to experiment with one behavior reinforcing another. I've just been satisfied to have them targeting, for example, for a nice piece of romaine lettuce. Yeah. So if you come up with a pre-Mac demonstration, you better make sure you video it for me because I will definitely want to celebrate that with you.
Yeah. Linda is working with 2 tortoises at the moment and has some great little high five videos, and she's just starting with a new individual.
They obviously work for the same principles that the rest of us do on the planet, and I think that's a very, very exciting project.
Fantastic. That pretty much brings us to the end of our list. If you're watching the replay and I've missed a question that you've asked, my apologies for that. We've reached 3-hour mark, so we might neatly package up the web class at this point. And I know some people it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God.
So thank you very much for your dedication to get more information into your bucket and potentially use it to build upon what I'm sure is already the great work that you're implementing with your learners. From myself and the 27 people that did make it live from all around the world this morning, evening, afternoon, Susan, buckets full of gratitude. We really appreciate, we're really thankful for you taking the time today to nerd out on ABA.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And thanks for the opportunity. Ryan, I want to say, really, you have extraordinarily good interviewing skills because I've interviewed with many people, and very often I'm stuck thinking to myself, what? And you keep the information that is most important to me flowing as well. So bravo to that skill set that you've developed, and keep on going.
Thank you very much. Definitely been a process of trial and error, I would say.
Yeah, you do very, very well.
We've smacked out number 40, I think, of the podcast episode. So
wow.
Go back and listen to the first ones and see if you share the same.
Great. Well, I'm here if you need me.
Lots of gratitude from Alana, Kelly, Sylvia, Sarah, Veronica, Frank, Jose, Linda, Tricia, and everyone else that's still here. We'll wrap it up there. Once again, everyone else that came in the audience, thank you very much for taking time out of your day, wherever you are, to be here as well. And
thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Have a good weekend, whatever's left of it. Bye-bye.
Thumbs off.